In the village of Homri, dawn never arrives. The sky remains a deep, thoughtful blue, and frost grows like script along doorframes. Skald Ari discovers his verses no longer rhyme. Words for morning have vanished from his tongue. He tries to catch them by their old edges, the way a fisherman catches light on a hook. But each time he opens his mouth, a draft runs through, and the syllables that used to come obediently now wander off like sheep from a broken pen. He wakes, if this can be called waking, in the bluish hour where the sea wears the color of hammered steel, where smoke rises from turf roofs and refuses to whiten. The world has paused on the hinge between night and day and forgotten how to swing forward. Ari touches the frost, reads its thin cursive, and feels certain that it is a message addressed to anyone who will learn a new alphabet. On the third blue morning that isn't, the goats begin bleating at wrong times, and the old church bell cannot find its tone. Children are born blinking as if light were a rumor. The baker needs dough in a house that never fills with the smell of bread, because heat is shy of committing to the air. What rises only rises halfway. Even the tide hesitates, lapping the stones with the politeness of a guest who has realized they were never invited. People in Homri light lamps and snuff them, light them and snuff them, as if testing whether flame alone can tip the world. The lamps give a pale steadiness, but they do not reach the cliff edge where gulls sit, like folded letters waiting for a reader. The gulls do not cry. Sound itself seems to have a weight that is not being lifted. Ari carries his lyre to the shore and plucks. The notes go out, then turn around mid-flight and sit down beside him like exhausted travelers. He hums to encourage them, but his hum is an old man's hum, an infirm thing. He thinks of metaphors. The sky is a bruise that refuses to heal. Time is rope and someone has tied it. The sun is a shy bride veiled in cloud. Yet he mistrusts these, because they are too ready, the kind of images one reaches for when the true words won't appear. It is not a bruise, not a rope, not a veil. It is a forgetting. Something in the world is forgotten. And because the world is made of language as much as rock and wind, a word has fallen out, and with it the hinge that word turned on. He goes to see Brynja, who keeps the weather beads and the tide book. In a room where herbs hang like dried thoughts, she listens. Dawn, she repeats, but her tongue balks, tripping on the boundary where a sound should form. We used to say it in songs. She manages, we taught it to our children, to bring them gently into ours. She opens the tide book, and the ink there is not faded, but a line is thinner than yesterday, as if careful time were starving. There are names that make things happen, she says. When you say them, you fasten two things that want to drift apart. Perhaps we have spent the name of the first light too often, made it a toy in our mouths, or we traded in a bargain we didn't notice, like giving away a hair to a wind. Brynja leads him to the back wall, where a hearthstone keeps a secret hollowness. She lifts it and takes out a small jar of ash. From the night they burned the whale outside the fjord, she explains. It smoked for 7 days, and the smoke wrote lines in the sky. Some old men read those lines as if they were ledgers. They said that, if ever the Easter gotta grow pale, we must return ash to ash and ask the sea to correct us. Ari takes the jar and walks to the cliff, where the sea moves with a reluctance learned from the sky. He tilts the ash and lets it fall, and though there is no wind, the ash somehow drifts sideways, as if searching for a word to land upon. A murmur passes over the water, not a sound but the idea of one. He believes for a heartbeat the color changes, that the blue thins into a softer thought of itself. But then the old iron returns, and the gulls shift their feet and look bored with prophecy. At night, which is nearly the same as day, Ari dreams of a hill made of ink. He climbs it, and at the top there's a pond transparent as a hell breath. He leans in and sees letters moving in the water, letters like fish, and he reaches with both hands, careful not to scare them. His hands come up full of lines he has written in other years. The lines wriggle and become syllables, then braid themselves into a rope. He understands that he can lower this rope into any dark and bring something up, but he must never pull too hard, or the rope will snap and the dark will spit the end back at him. He wakes with his palms tingling. He goes to his desk and writes a verse, and his pen stumbles where it expects the old word. He leaves a blank. He writes a second verse and a third, each with a blank where a name should be. The poem looks like a shoreline with coves where the sea has forgotten to come in. He remembers a winter long past when his mother taught him the names of hours by the tasks that fit them. There was the hour for untying knots in fishing line, the hour for spreading barley to dry on a sheet of sailcloth, the hour for stories told with hands because the mouth was chewing, the hour for forgiving neighbors because the tide had ruined both their traps and there was no point in pettiness. And there's the first hour, she had said, shifting him on her hip and pointing east. The hour that doesn't belong to anyone yet. The hour that forgives you for all the hours that came before. He tries to recall the word she used, the village word, the one the old men carved into bones of seals and hung over doorways. He tastes it, feels the mouth shape of it, but in his mind's ear it sounds like footsteps coming down a corridor and stopping just before the threshold. Holm readjusts to not having a beginning. Work begins when a man grows tired of waiting. Meals begin when hands forget to be idle. Songs begin in the middle and end disguised as beginnings. The young don't know what they are missing. The old pretend they don't care. In between, people arrange their lives on shelves where nothing casts a shadow, and shadows are everyone's private superstition. Lovers still meet behind the fish racks, but they kiss as if they're starting in a story with the first page torn out. Fishermen set out in return, but they forget to boast because boasting requires that the day have a first moment to measure the rest against. The priest tries to rearrange his prayers, but the psalm sound is buttoned without the small praise that used to go at their front. A rumor comes of a trader who arrives on a boat that has more scars than planks. He says that across the water, in a town whose name refuses to stay in his mouth, the east is given up also. He says shepherds there have watched their ewes give birth in perpetual dusk, and their lambs grow confused about what it means to stand. He says a girl fell in love with a man whose hair never had highlights anymore, and that somehow made him less true in her eyes, because truth used to arrive with light. Maybe the sky is old, the trader suggests, and it wants a rest in a single color. He laughs, but he does not meet anyone's gaze. He knows that even jokes should begin somewhere, and his did not. Ari goes to the headland where the old oak leans inland from centuries of listening to storms. He places his hand on its bark and asks it what name it used to hear first each day. The tree answers with rings pressed together in a patient hush. A raven lands on one of the lower branches and speaks the fool's version of human speech. Say what sounds like how now and where, and then, surprisingly clear, begin. Ari looks up quickly. Say that again. The raven clicks its beak, hops sideways, and preens. When it tires of refusing, it drops a piece of something from its beak, an old coin, smooth with handling. Ari picks it up. One side shows a sun with rays he cannot quite believe. The other shows a man rowing. Around the edge is writing that looks like frost. He takes this as permission to row. Brinja gives him a small bundle, dried fish, a flask of milk with a lid made from a shell, the ash jar, a sealed bladder filled with air in case he wants to sing it. If you are looking for a word, you might need to ask where words go when no one uses them, she says. Her eyes, always the color of seawater, seem darker in this unseasoned light. There's a place, my grandmother said, where the land dips like a hand. The old ones called it the place of saying. Things spoken there learn to stay. Ari nods and does not admit that he has heard the same place called the throat of the world, called the latch, called the bishop's hollow, called 8 names and none. Every story has a point where the names multiply, because no one has been there recently enough to choose. He launches his skiff. The oars talk to the water with the old respect of with speaking with the element that gnawed it. The sea is not hostile. It is simply inattentive. He rows along the cliff face and turns into a cleft where the rock narrows like lips about to pronounce either welcome or warning. Inside the cleft, the water rests, the settling of a thought. He ties the boat to an iron ring that has never rusted. He climbs the steps that the first settlers cut into the rock, steps that have taught the feet of the dead to return and see how their decisions aged. At the top is a ledge in a hollow half full of pebbles. Each pebble has a letter scratched on it. He kneels and touches them. They are not the alphabet he learned. They are older, the shapes that words were when they were bolder, before they learned their manners in monasteries. He understands none of them, then understands all of them, because meaning is a tide that can flood any bed if you give it time. He speaks, not the word he cannot find, But the words he can. He speaks his name, the village name, the names of goats and fallen trees, and the names lovers whisper when the sea is too loud for anyone else to hear them. He speaks Brynja's name with care. He speaks his mother's with an ache that is 2 parts lost to 1 part gratitude. He speaks for a long time, and with each said name the pebbles seem to breathe. The hollow fills with breath that is not air. It is attention. The cliff listens, and a film of frost begins at the edge of the rock and writes inward, repeating the same line in 1,000 scripts. He reaches to the ash jar and tips it over the pebbles. The ash quiets the place as snow quiets a street. He waits. A faint paling touches the east then. So faint he wonders if he invented it, because he deserves a sign after working this hard. The pail does not grow. It balances there like a promise that neither accepts nor declines. He feels certain there is someone else on the ledge, though he hears no footstep. You are looking for a lost word, says a voice that could be the sea speaking from behind a cloth. Yes, Ari says, his own voice careful, because he does not want to spend any more syllables than he must. The one that begins everything, the one we use without thinking, the one that does not belong to anyone, and so belongs to everyone. The not-quite voice considers this and then says, "It was never yours. It is not something you say to make the world behave. It is something the world says to you." Ari straightens and feels foolish and also relieved, like a man who at last discovers the door opens inward. "Then teach me to hear it," he says. "That is not mine to do," the voice replies, "but it is yours to practice. You have filled the mouth of this place with names. That is one way. Another is to empty your own mouth and wait." He waits. He waits long enough that his knees speak their complaints and his stomach begins to recount, as if to an innkeeper, all the meals it deserved but never received. While he waits, he thinks of everything he has ever begun poorly and everything he has ever begun well, and he sees that in both cases some listening wanted to happen first, and sometimes did, and sometimes did not. When he can bear the waiting no longer, he stands and goes to the edge and looks at the eastern line where the sea pretends to end. The blue there is no longer entirely itself. It is thinking of another color. He cannot name that color, because the name hurts to approach. He accepts that he cannot speak it. He will learn to hear it. He will teach Homri to hear it. He climbs down the steps with care, as if carrying a bowl filled to the lip. He unties the boat and rows back, and now the oars make a slightly different sound when they enter the water, a sound with suggestion of answer in it. The village is as he left it. The goats undecided. The baker needing hope. Brynja's window with herbs listing their virtues to no one. He stands in the square where a bell wants to ring, and cannot remember how. "I will not name it," he tells the bell, "but we will make a place for it." He asks the people to come to their first tasks, the ones they used to do when the east clear its throat and pulled a blade of color across the sky. They come with kindling and nets and bread troughs, and water pails and combs for their hair and whetstones for their knives. They come because it is something to do, and doing is what people choose when thinking might break them. He builds, with them, a ceremony that refuses to be called one. No priest presides. No scroll is unfurled. They stand with their tools in hand, not moving and not speaking, and not waiting for permission from old words. They stand until their tools begin to feel like extensions of a time that wants to open. The smallest girl there laughs without knowing why. An old woman remembers a tune and hums it, stopping before it becomes a song. A boy adjusts the balance of a pail and discovers a new way to hold weight. Ari does nothing but stand among them and listen. The way you listen for a friend approaching on snow. Something shifts. It is not a color, not a sound. It is the arch of a brow and a face you love that tells you a thought has moved inside it. It is patience acknowledging that it has been seen. The blue does not vanish. It learns transparency. The frost of the doorframes writes a different sentence, one with a small opening for warmth to step in. A dog pricks its ears. The bell gives a single note, which is not a ring, not yet, but is the exact idea of a ring. People do what they have always done when they are not sure if they are witnessing a miracle. They pretend they are not, so as not to scare it away. Ari goes home and writes the poem with the blanks still in it. He decides the blanks are correct. He leaves them there, places where the reader's breath can offer what his tongue cannot. He falls asleep, and if he dreams of the pond of letters again, he does not remember the letters this time, only that there was wind and it smelled like bread. The next not dawn, he goes to the headland again and stands with the oak. The raven returns and says nothing at all, which he understands as a lesson. He thanks the bird for the coin and returns it to the hollow where pebbles breathe. Standing there, he becomes aware of a very old story that all skalds know, about an hour before the first hour, that sits folded up at the bottom of the world like a secret. He does not try to tell it. He lets it tell him. By the time the trader returns from a town whose name will not settle on his tongue, people in Holmri have grown used to beginning things without announcing their beginnings. They are not less themselves for it. If anything, they are more, because without the front of the day to lean against, they must each be their own hinge. The sky remains deep and thoughtful, a blue that has learned to share. There are mornings in it, perhaps tiny, unspoken, but Ari would not say so. He goes to the cliff and unrolls a new poem and holds up to the wind, and the wind reads through it without catching, and this, too, feels like a kind of light. He sets the poem down and sits and watches, and what he watches does not change, except that now he understands where to put his silence so that the world can answer. A one-eyed raven lands on Ari's shoulder and croaks. Winter has no name, and so it has no end. It drops a bead of amber that hums like a beehive. The elders argue. Is this omen or insult? The bird's weight is nothing. Yet Ari feels the entire slope of the sky lean onto his bones, as if the message had mass and chose him as its incline. The raven's missing eye is not a wound but a decision. The socket looks like a closed door that has learned to listen better than any open one. Its remaining eye is a polished seed of storm, full of reflections that don't belong to the present. When the beak opens, the sentence falls out with a clatter, not quite words and not quite weather, and lodges behind Ari's ribs where truths like to hide until they grow impatient. He cups the bead. Warmth moves in it like a remembered summer crossing a window pane. Inside the honeystone, a small imperfection catches the light, an old insect or a fleck of leaf caught forever in the amber's breathless museum. And the hum it gives is not merely a sound, but a pattern of sound, the geometry of 1,000 bodies deciding to be one body for a purpose. Brynja comes near and inclines her head until the fur at her hood brushes Ari's knuckles. Listen with the skin, she says, and he does, and the hum unthreads into motes. For a heartbeat he smells thyme and crushed clover and the sugar ache of overripe berries. He hears a river rehearsing how to be fast. He sees, without seeing, a field lit by bees working the yellow architecture of their religion. All of this lives in a bead smaller than the tip of his thumb. It hums because remembrance has edges, and the amber remembers it has to keep them from fraying. The elders gather in the square where the not-quite bell has learned to offer a single patient vowel. They come wrapped in skins that have outlasted 3 fashions of weather and 7 fashions of gossip. Each has a kind of face a land makes from wind, salt, and duty. They look at the bead and pretend not to look at the raven, because to look at a messenger too directly is to admit that you were waiting. Ari sets the amber on a flat stone. The hum grows or the silence leans closer. He cannot tell which. Winter has no name, he repeats, tasting the shape of the raven's sentence. And when he says the frost around the stone makes a tiny shifting sound, like sand remembering it used to be glass. Elder Torgils, who mistrusts anything smaller than his fist, says, an insult. We have names enough. Our grandfathers named storms and made them sit. Elder Runa, who learned to talk by whispering to goats, answers, omens don't ask to be liked. She leans down until her braid spills out her hood like a dark rope, and studies the bead as if it were a pupil in need of encouragement. Listen how it offers what we cannot grow for ourselves this season. Perhaps it is a loan of sun. Elder Finjorn snorts. Or a wasp trick. Amber lies about being warm because it looks like light. So, do people. Brynja says gently, and Finjorn pretends he didn't hear. A child slips out from between the legs of the gathered coats and crouches so close to the stone that her breath threatens to varnish the bead. The bird was missing an eye, she says solemnly, which is how children announce a fairy has entered a room. Maybe one eye sees what is, and the other sees what wants to be. Ari hears himself answer, and the child nods as if this is obvious. The raven, meanwhile, patrols the ridge of the meeting hall, stamping once as if to nail the word into the roof. The people pretend not to be afraid of a creature that speaks. They perform politeness all mortals practice toward anything that reminds them language doesn't belong only to them. The argument becomes a net. Its knots tightened by habit more than purpose. Is it an omen? If so, for what? The bead speaks of summer. Winter is at issue. Perhaps the message says that endings require their opposites to measure themselves against. Perhaps the bead's sound is a hive looking for its own body among the months. And since bees fly toward light, they will lead the hour that cannot be named to the place where it learns its edges. Or perhaps it is an insult, a mockery of emptiness by abundance. Summer held up to winter the way a rich man accidentally shakes coins in front of a man who has only the dignity of his thirst. The elders mapped these guesses onto the stone, the way a sailor maps reefs onto memory. Ari listens, and the bead listens, and the raven's head tilts, and the hum collects thoughts that leave people's mouths and fingers and drift toward it like fine dust. What is a season without a name? Bringe's grandmother once taught that a name is a fence and a gate at once. It keeps lost things from getting loster, and it lets you invite them in. If winter has no name, it is branched infinitely into itself, a forest that never reaches a clearing. It cannot be asked to leave because no one can call it to the door. Ari turns the sentence over. No name, no end. Not because the end cannot be found, but because the shape of the end cannot be asked. He wants to ask the raven, but the bird has gone to work being a raven again, the way a messenger returns to being wind once the letter has been read. The one eye that remains is old with other errands. Amber as the keeper cries. Runa says, "Put it near flame, and you will hear little voices." Pops and sighs, what it took in from trees when they were still making decisions. She asks for the bead. Ari gives it. She cups it in a spoon and holds it over a lamp. No naming happens when it warms, only the modest softening of the hum into a more generous shape. People lean closer, and each hears what they need. One man hears his father sharpening an axe. A woman hears thought dripping from the eaves of the house where she loved a man badly and then better. The child hears the black and gold choir that ransom her fear stings for a fascination with choreography. Finn-Jorn hears nothing and is offended by the generosity of silence. He declares the thing a trick again, a bit of tree ghost meant to distract decent folk from their stubbornness. Ari asks for a bowl and fills it with snow. He drops the bead in. The snow does not melt. Instead, the hum walks through the ice crystals, as if each were a small room where a friend might be found. The sound alters. It takes on the grain of distance, like dancing seen through cloth. It remembers summer without insisting on it. Brinja says, that is what wisdom is, memory that refuses to bully the present. Someone laughs softly and covers it with a cough, because laughter in Homer has become a precious metal. You don't spend it without a reason you would offend in the next world. The elders do what elders must. They turn the fact until its edges are as familiar as worry beads. If winter has no name, Torgil says, we should give it one. That is how you leash a thing. Or you marry to us, Runa counters, and then it will stay. Finn-Jorn brightens at the thought of leashes. Others dim at the thought of vows. Ari feels the raven's sentence working through him like a slow medicinal, burning under the tongue where stubbornness hides. Names are not only leashes in marriages. Sometimes they are promises to behave. If the world once gave them the first light's name, perhaps the price was to remember it with care. Perhaps they borrowed it so hard that the world took it back. Perhaps the same is true of winter. They have called it by half-truths, hardship, endurance, trial, and forgotten to call it by the names that make even a stern season feel seen. Rest, keeping, clarity. He lifts the bead and holds it to his ear, and the hum condenses into a phrase he could never say aloud without cheapening it. A choir of little wills choosing the common will, not erasing themselves, but agreeing to aim one way for a time. Bees do this to winter their queens. They become each other's weather. It is not only a memory, he says. It is an instruction. The elders look, some suspicious, some relieved to be told what to do, some merely tired of the way days have recently refused to begin. We should make a hive, Ari says, and Finn-Jorn barks at the absurdity and then quiets because absurd things have been the only things working lately. Not a real one, Ari continues. A village shaped into the shape of warmth. We should learn to be each other's heat. If winter has no name to end it, We will make an end that does not rely on a word. They build a circle out of bodies and breath. Not quickly, not in a frenzy that would spook whatever fragile physics they are courting, but with the dignity of a ritual that does not know it is one. People stand shoulder to shoulder. The smallest are lifted inward, so their heat won't wander. Tools are brought, pans still warm from bread that refuse to smell like bread, stones that remember hands, fleeces that recall sheep better than men recall themselves. The bead sits at the center on its flat stone, the hum of it an invitation rather than a command. Brynja walks the rim, tapping each shoulder as if telling the circle, "You are a note, you are a note, you too." When they breathe together, something recognizes itself. Not a god, not a law, but perhaps something that laws are written to imitate. The air between them thickens. Not hotter, truer. It holds. Their exhalations are received instead of squandered. Frost crawls toward the bead, and at the last, stops. A thread of melt appears like a vein opening to carry warmth somewhere it has been forbidden to go. The raven launches from a roof and circles once, a black comma in a sentence the village has been trying to finish for weeks. It lands on a stone beside the amber and pecks it once, gentle as a grandmother knocking on a child's door, then croaks a sound that is neither approval nor warning, only punctuation. Is this an omen? It is at least a practice. The elders look less certain of their categories. Torgils, who on a leash, rests his hand on Runa's forearm and does not remove it when she fails to flinch. Finjorn, who wanted insult, stares at the tiny sluice of water and distrusts how much he wants to weep. We will have to keep doing it, Brynja says, and we will have to do it without asking whether it is working, because asking breaks a thing. The child who smelled the bee choir smiles the way people smile when they have learned a password they will never tell. Night, which still refuses to end in any official way, leans in to see what mortals have made of themselves. The bead cools. The hum becomes a private purr, like a cat choosing a lap. The people break the circle in twos and threes, reluctant without admitting it. Ari puts the amber back in his pocket and feels that they're like a hearthstone hired to travel. The raven rides his shoulder until he reaches his door, then hops to the lintel and closes its one eye as if keeping watch for the unseen one. Winter has no name, Ari murmurs, and this time he hears also the claws the bird did not utter because messengers love restraint. And so you must end it for yourselves, not by dismissal, but by agreement. He dreams of combs, hexagons clicked into patient infinities, empty cells full of purpose, because emptiness is what holds sweetness in a shape. He dreams that each villager is a cell, and that the bead of amber is a drop of summer poured from mouth to mouth in an old rite. He wakes and the hum is quiet, but his hands know where to go. The shoulders, the tools, to the bell rope, to the first task that admits it isn't first. Morning does not come. They come to each other. And somewhere far in the east, where the world keeps its vowels, a nameless season notices that there are edges being drawn for it, not in speech but in warmth, and it hesitates in the noblest way a season can. It considers ending. The elders never vote on whether the raven brought omen or insult. Categories shrink under use the way leather stiffens after too many rains. Instead, when they speak of that day, they say, "It delivered a lesson we were ready for, and let the sentence find its own period." The raven returns sometimes, the one-eyed scholar of roofs, and says nothing while saying much. When it leaves a black feather or a bit of ancient thread, or, once, a scale of ice shaped like a petal. Ari keeps the amber in a pouch against his heart, and learns that humming can be done without a stone. He walks the village before not dawn and listens to the places where breath fails to collect, and he invites breath to stay there a little longer, and sometimes it does. He does not name the doing. He lets it end what it can. Inside a beach whale's ribcage, Holmry's Hall, the villagers debate whether to leave or to challenge the nameless season. Fisherwoman Brynja proposes a quest. Find the Jarl of Winds and force him to speak winter's true name. Ari volunteers. Dead in his eyes, the ribs arch overhead like the fingers of a giant hand cupped around their breath, and the old marrow scent has long since turned to salt and tar and human argument. Lanterns hang in pairs from the bone spines, each pair a small moon caught between knuckle and knuckle. The floor is sand tamped by generations of feet, patterned with the scuffs of boots and the tidy circles made by children turning on their heels, because turning in one place feels like travel when the world refuses to move. "Leave," says Elder Torgils, testing the size of the word against his chest. "To where? A place with bluer blue? What we can see of the east follows us in our eyes." He taps the nearest rib with the back of his knuckles, and the bone returns a note like a bell that has been asleep for a long time and is trying to remember its waking sound. "We would only import our namelessness. Then we challenge it," says Runa, who sharpens knives in the doorway as if arguments were ropes that occasionally need cutting. She spits without malice into the sand. "I've wrestled rams that learn courtesy after fall. Seasons don't wrestle. Finjorn growls. They starve, then feed, and we stand between like fences." His eyes flick toward the amber bead in Ari's palm, as if tempted to insult it again and failing for lack of appetite. The bead hums with the discretion of an old friend lighting a candle and pretending the candle was already there. Brynja has tied her hair back with a strip of net, so that her proposal will not be mistaken for theater. "The Jarl of Winds," she says, and the wind itself stirs outside in a way that suggests it has an ear to the bone. Every gale has a genealogy. We have been scolded by breezes in the market and courted by proper subtleties in the spring. But there is one who collects them, gives them their marching songs and their manners. If anyone knows Winter's name, it is the one who tells Wind which syllables to carry and which to drop. "Force him," Runa repeats softly, tasting the hubris. A person who forces Wind should wear stones in her pockets. "Ask him, then," Brynja concedes, though her mouth keeps it square. Persuade him. Bargain. What else do we have that the sky might want but our breath arranged together? We will offer what we learned. We will offer Hive. Ari feels everyone's gaze look past his face to whatever sits behind his eyes. He is the one who went the place of saying and returned without a word, but with an understanding of where words go to take off their boots. He is the one the raven trusts with shoulder. He is also the one who misused language for years, turning it into neat roads when sometimes it wanted to be a river. "I owe," he says, and he does not specify to whom. To the hour that used to arrive and now refuses. To his mother who taught him the first hour's forgiveness. To the villagers who have learned to begin without a beginning. To the child who listens with the skin. "If there is a gate, I will knock. If there is no gate, I will learn to be the kind of voice that does not need one." "Take 3, Torgil says automatically, as if numbers were charms that could armor a man against unknown shapes. 3 is unlucky only if it thinks it is 2. "I will go," Brynja says. It is not bravado. It is a particular stubborn tenderness of one who has spent her life hauling nets in weather that insisted. If the winds need convincing, they should hear a fisherwoman explain why a boat deserves a corridor. "I will go," says a child from the square, surprising everyone and only slightly herself. She looks at the ceiling ribs and speaks to them as if they were a chorus of ants. "I hear bees in the stone. Maybe I will hear wind in the places where it hides." "You will not," Runa says, and the child's mouth goes small with possible tears, and then learns the village's new habit of swallowing tears and turning them into concentrate. "But you will walk with us to the cliff and bless our backs with the names of small, ordinary things we forget when we chase giants." They decide, then, in the way decisions have lately been made in Homri, without ceremony that knows itself as such. They string dried fish in rat bread that smells like desire more than like bread. Brynja packs a coil of rope fat as a wrist and thin as a thought, a small adze, flint, a needle as long as a finger for stitching what the world might tear. Ari packs the amber bead in a pouch that has held many different kinds of tenderness. Coins, a curl of hair, a smooth worry stone worn by other worries. He slides his lyre in its wrap of sailcloth, because sometimes wind prefers to be sung to rather than petitioned. At the doorway, the raven waits, balancing on one leg with the old, patient arrogance of messengers who know that messages will occur whether or not they are present, but prefer to be present. It drops a feather. No omen, no insult. Only a reminder that journeying is a way of moving the place you come from so that it can see itself from outside. The child with a listening skin lays her hand on each back, For the pails that do not slosh when you hurry, she says to Brynja. For the words that do not run away when you open your mouth, she says to Ari. To the raven, she says nothing, and the raven bows its head as if thanked. They descend the path where Frost writes cursive no one currently reads. The sea is a single deep thought. Brynja chooses a boat with Scar like a smile. Good boats have been nearly killed, she says, and Ari nods because surviving has become a credential. They push off. The oars enter the water, with that subtle answer the sea had begun to learn after his visit to the latch. Wind comes in well-mannered, then tugs, then sulks. Brynja lets the sail think it made a decision to fill. Winds obey better when they are allowed their theater. They follow the old storm road, a seam where currents meet and argue politely. Seabirds sponsor them. The horizon is a philosophy examine the sky, keeps postponing. They pass the rock that looks like a reclining bear, the scary that looks like a question mark when the tide is wrong, the scaries that form a crooked line that mothers use to call for the stitches that keep the sea from spilling out. Ari plays a phrase on a lyre, and the wind leans its head to listen. Brynja clicks her tongue, and the sail pretends it was always planning to obey. Where's the Jarl of Winds? Old tales lodge him in every difficult place at once. On a high white shoulder where cloud goes to toughen, inside a blue cave where the ocean teaches itself to be air, at the center of a whirlpool that is not hungry but principled, in a hut with a door on each wall and no walls in between. They aim for the seam the whale hunters call the Weather's Mouth, a canyon cut into water by something that must have been bored and enormous. As they enter, the air grows tight with attention. Sound changes its shoes. A gull's cry arrives braided with its own echo. Brynja ties her hair twice. At the canyon's throat the boat stalls without stalling, moving forward the way a story moves forward when it is telling itself where it must go. The walls lift on either side, basalt organ pipes, frostbitten and solemn, and the wind arrives not as a shove, but as a counsel. One draft tastes of iron in distant snowfields. One smells faintly of eelgrass in summer's wet knees. One is so dry it leaves a chalk on the tongue. Ari stands, legs remembering goat paths and arguments, and speaks the first honest thing he can. We have come to ask for a word that is not ours. The canyon answers with non-committal grammar. A sigh that might be dismissal, a curl that might be invitation, a whistle that might mean please wait, there's something I must tell you, but I keep forgetting the beginning. Brynja plants the oar. We will pay, she says, practical even in prayer. We will pay with breath arranged together. We have learned to be a hive. We can teach it to a place that has none. A figure condenses the way a gust learns manners. Not suddenly, not from nowhere, but from everywhere at once. It stands at the end of the boat on nothing in particular, boots wet with a suggestion of spray, cloak patterned with the maps of storms that never came ashore. Its hair is cloud-light. Its beard is frost drawn on glass by a child who takes lessons seriously. Its eyes are the colors you only see in ice when you're lying under and pretending not to be afraid. When it speaks, it does so from every gap between basalt columns, from every chisel-marked water ever made. You bring a stone that hums, it says, and Ari feels the bead warm through the pouch. You have organized your breath. You would like me to organize your season. We would like its true name. Ari says, the way a man asks a surgeon for the quiet instrument and not the sharp one. He keeps his voice small, so that the canyon will not mistake it for weather. We would like to call it properly, so it may know where to end. The Jarl of Winds, if that is who it is, and who else could it be, tilts its head as if listening to a distant, inconvenient kettle. You traded your first hour's word for convenience and songs. It says without malice, merely accounting. Now you ask for the cold hour's word, as if names were torches you could carry from hut to hut. It looks at Brynja. And you, boat talker, would force wind to pronounce a thing that belongs to ice. Not force, Brynja says. Borrow the instruction for returning it. We understand debt. The Jarl leans, and the boat leans with it as if sharing weight were a courtesy. Winter's word, it says, was never in wind. We carry it, we do not own it. The word you want is kept by those who do not move. Ask the mountain that has forgotten how to fall. Ask the buried river that becomes glass to learn patience. Ask bone that outlives its country. It puts one boot heel on the gunwale, and the boat, does not sink, because sometimes physics is willing to be mocked by poetry if poetry has calluses. Still, the Jarl adds, I can lend you a map to the places where staying is a language. What price? Ari asks. He will not pretend bargains do not have spines. The Jarl studies him, and in that study Ari feels counted, not diminished, not increased, merely numbered among the moving things in a way that is not unkind. A story you have not yet told, the Jarl says. You find beginnings. You have written blanks and call them honest. One day you will have a story that refuses to belong to anyone but yourself. You will want to speak it aloud. You must give me its first line. Ari swallows. To promise a sentence you have not yet met is to marry an absence. But he has learned to trust the architecture of emptiness. I agree, he says. The Jarl nods as if witnessing a nail enter wood cleanly. The wind shapes itself into a vellum no hand can hold, a sheet of coal that bends without creasing. Lines appear, paths threaded through white, the iconography of slowness. A mountain is inked with shadow. A valley's lip is signed with the marks of hooves and skis, and the sliding of stones that have all the time in the world. In the center, a figure like a house with no windows, the hermitage of unmelting, where the buried river lets strangers hear the sound it makes when it refuses to be motion. There, the Jarl says, knock with warmth, wait with respect. Do not bargain the way men bargain for fish. If you are given a syllable, do not pronounce it unless you are prepared to be changed by it. Brinja reaches to take the map, and her fingers go through it lightly, receiving the instructions in their bones. Ari feels a route arrive in him as a rhythm. 3 long breaths, 1 shallow. 2 steps, 1 stillness, the pause you keep before saying a name you have not earned. The boat noses backward without rowing, as if released by a guard who saw what it needed to see. The figure uncondenses. The canyon forgets and then remembers that it is walls. If you lie to me about the line, the Jarl says conversationally, as if asking whether they prefer tea or nothing, your boat will hear about it before I do. Then it is gone in the dignified way weather departs, by continuing to exist elsewhere. They do not speak for a while, because speech would have to compete with the large quiet, now sitting in a boat like a fifth traveler. When they do, it is to inventory not their supplies, but their understandings. We go to what does not move, Brinja says. We ask it to lend us the shape of an ending. We knock with warmth. Ari says, touching the pouch where the bead is, where the village's breath is learning to be portable. We wait as if waiting were work, Brinja adds. The raven, who has ridden the mast like a black weather vane, gives 1 croak that is almost approval and almost hunger. They sail toward land that keeps itself. The shore offers a shoulder slick with hoarfrost. They haul the boat up beyond the reach of anything foolish. The sky does not lighten, and yet the snow shows them everything. Hairprints like handwriting. The neat, brutal exclamation marks a fox. The unraveling script of wind across drifts pause mid-sentence. They climb into white that has more shades than blue ever confessed. Ari counts his breath according to the wind map inside him, and when he loses count, Brinja sets the rhythm with the thud of her staff, and when her arm grows heavy, he sings a line without words, and the mountain gives back a harmony so low it feels like reassurance in the bones. The hermitage of unmelting is not a building. It is a place that has learned to be its own roof. Ice opens like a book that wants to be read slowly. They step into a lightless hall where darkness is not an absence, but a presence that has agreed to sit quietly while they pass. Somewhere underfoot, a river practices staying. Ari feels the amber bead vibrate to a pitch that is no sound. Brinja takes his hand. It is not romance. It is electricity made out of trust. Knock with warmth, he whispers. He cups the bead. She cups his hands. Together they cup their breath over what they hold. The hum becomes a small architecture. The ice answers in a dialect of stillness that is all vowels. Something notices that mortals have brought Hive to a place that knows only single, noble cold. The river beneath, faithful, stubborn, true, thinks about moving, then thinks better of it. But in the thinking a sentence forms, not yet in their language, not yet in any, a sentence made of patience folding itself into a shape another patience could sit inside. What price? Brinja murmurs, because everything large charges. The darkness, polite uncoiling, offers its terms. Leave no instrument here that can make an ending by itself. Ari loosens the lyre from his shoulder and considers the hollowness of his body. How sound uses that hollowness the way bees use cells. He understands. He sets the lyre down at the threshold to guard against haste. The raven hops down and stands on the strings, closing its one eye. It seems ready to watch over silence until it learns to speak. They wait. Waiting becomes their craft. In the waiting, the not word inside the ice sharpens away as star sharpens when the eye stops insisting. When it is finally almost a syllable, not to be spoken but to be recognized, Ari feels the debt lift in him like a weight someone else decides to carry. He does not reach for it. He lets it come. He does not imagine saying it. He imagines hearing it in the bell they left at home, in the goat breathing on cold straw, in the hill that once a year remembers to let go a little. He imagines bringing back not a trophy but habit, not a leash but a gate. Outside, the world remains blue and thoughtful, but a degree of consideration has changed in it. If a season can incline its head, winter does so by a fraction. If a village can learn to end a thing by arranging breath, Homri is already doing it in their absence. Ari closes his eyes and places the almost syllable where the blanks in his poem have been waiting, not to fill them, but to bless their emptiness with meaning. Brynja squeezes his fingers once. The count of a heartbeat, the promise of return, and in the low, resonant dark the river of ice offers him the first curve of a name that will not be forced, only learned. Ari, Brynja, a runaway thrall named Kettle, and Noah the rune weaver swear an oath on black ice. The raven accept the role of guide in exchange for a first pick of any proverb found along the way. The sea creaks like an old man deciding if he will stand. The oath is not loud. It is 4 breaths braided and let go, a loop of steam briefly visible before the blue swallows it. Each lays a palm flat to the gloss and feels the winter listening from below. The ice gives back a pulse like distant carpentry. Somewhere, the cold is fitting a joint. Noah pricks her thumb and draws a circle no bigger than a coin around their hands. The blood is dark as seal oil and slow to decide. Not binding, she says, only remembering. The raven clicks its beak at the circle and, satisfied with its share of wisdom to come, hops to Ari's shoulder and pretends the arrangement was its idea all along. Kettle stands a little apart, as men do who have learned that closeness is a currency they can't afford to spend freely. The iron ring that once lived around his neck is gone, but it left a habit in his posture, an invisible yoke made of yesterday. He wears a belt of rope and a knife with a history of cutting the wrong things for the right reasons. When he finally puts his hand to the ice, his fingers are scarred with old obedience. My oath is to not run when nothing is chasing me, he says. That was my talent. The ice answers him with a thin, approving groan, like a teacher pleased by a student who has at last named a lesson. Noah is older than her hair admits. In dim places, her braids seem to right themselves. She speaks to the air in the grammar of lines and knots, the way some women speak to babies, patient and amused. She has a pouch of bone flakes polished by silence, a sliver of obsidian that drinks starlight, and a skein of kelp fiber dyed with alder bark. Runes want to be arranged by people who listen, she mutters, kneeling to scratch a mark that is not quite a letter and not quite a road. Letters are for days that already know their shape. We are in unlettered weather. The mark she makes is a door leaning on its side. For luck, she says, and then, because luck is shy, she wipes it with her sleeve and does not look at it again. They shoulder their small burdens. Brynja with coils of line and a gaff, Ari with a humming amber in its pouch and the memory of a syllable that refuses to be born, Kettle with a rolled sealskin. He calls bed and history and apology, Noah with the weightless weight of an unfinished pattern. The raven tilts its head, studies the horizon for verbs, and gives a single croak that sounds like begin. The ice beneath them adjusts. The whole sheet lifts and settles, as if trying on fickleness and declining it. They step out. Travel on black ice teaches humility faster than sermons. It looks like certainty and behaves like opinion. They move in a file. Brynja first, the way a woman who has read weather from its belly reads ice with her ankles, then Kettle, who takes a step only once the step has accepted his name, then Ari, counting breath in the pattern the wind map gave him, then Noah, who places her feet where absences suggest. The raven ferries ahead from hummock to hummock, selecting phrases from the landscape and hoarding them like a wealthy man hoards sorrow. Proverb, it announces, pecking the rhyme off a pressure ridge. When the sea stiffens, you learn how your knees pray. It tucks the line under a wing and eyes them with possession. Finders first. It reminds. We swore. Ari says. The bird blinks with that ancient courtesy that allows bargains to feel like companionship. The sky is deeply, fully undecided. No sun, no formal stars, only a rinse light that belongs to fish. Sound travels oddly, flattening out and returning brave. Their steps echo under them a long way off. Sometimes the ice sings, long, whale-like vowels that hint at a music no human throat agrees to keep for long. Each time the pitch rises, Bryn just stops, waits, and then goes on with a sailor's casual faith. When ice complains, it is only remembering water, she says. When it screams, that is water remembering force. By midday, if there is such a thing anymore, they reach a country of sastrugi and black leads. The wind has carved scripture here, ribs of snow so hard they throw sparks when the iron of Noah's boot rings kisses them. Between the white ridges, lines of open water lie like eyes that have chosen not to blink. They navigate with politeness. Brynja tosses her line, wraps it twice around a sastruga, and makes a bridge of rope over one lead too wide to jump. Kettle tests it. His old life taught him weight, how to carry it and how to be it. When the rope holds, he nods once in the direction of whoever might be responsible and crosses. Ari follows and learns the sensation of avoid admitting him on a trial basis. Where the ice heaves against itself, a black dorsum rises, draped with glaze and rime. Below it, a throat, a crack deeper than conjecture. Air pours out smelling of iron and a story. The raven hops to the lip and bows. Proverb, it declares, smug with discovery. The mouth that refuses to close becomes a door. Greedy? Noah tells it, smiling despite herself. That was almost a blessing. The bird docks a line in its ledger with prim efficiency. A proverb is a blessing with less responsibility. When the wind comes, more than breeze, less than decision, it bears a texture that Ari now knows. The council voice of the canyon, the polite authority of a jarl. A brief uplift under their clothes, as if unseen hands were straightening collars, and then gone. Brynja glances west toward the basalt organ. We are still on the map, she says. It is keeping us honest. Kettle points with his chin toward the interior, and it is reminding us that honest men freeze if they stand still. They move on. The first night, if night can be counted in a sky that refuses to measure itself, they make camp at the lee of a snow bulge that looks like a sleeping ox. Noah set a line of runes to catch wandering luck. Simple shapes, the grammar hearth and hand and bone. Brynja cuts shallow holes with the adze and seats their feet in them, turned out like dancers so the wind cannot argue them into walking in their sleep. Ari takes the amber out, and the bead hums low, polite to the darkness that is doing a thorough job. Kettle listens, eyes closed, and his jaw unclenches a notch. Sound like bees, he says, and then, ashamed of wanting sweetness, adds, bees that mind their business. That is the trick, Ari tells him gently, to mind a business big enough to include others. They eat dried fish, a little bread that tastes too much like memory, and melt chips of blue ice for water. The sea creaks again nearby, testing its old bones. In the pauses, they can hear pebbles rolling under the lid of the shore, a soft gossip. The raven skulks a few steps off and pretends disinterest in crumbs. Proverb, it says finally, unable to help itself. Do not teach patience to what outlives you. Brynja tips her head. Keep that one. It will stop me from scolding mountains. And rivers, Noah adds. I in the flat east with a buried sound of the unmoving river waits, like a promise refusing to become threat. Kettle tells a piece of himself because the ice has a way of inviting confession by offering its wide. Listening back, he speaks without looking up. I ran from a house that called my work a favor and my breath a debt. He says it without malice, tired not of hating, but of the posture hatred requires. When I crossed the first field as a free man, the wind asked for my name, and I did not have one I trusted. He looks at Ari with a measuring patience. Will the mountain accept the name a man is still growing into? Mountains are slow readers. Ari says, they will let you finish. They sleep in shifts. Noah dreams with open eyes, the way women who have lost things and gotten them back prefer to. Brynja grinds her teeth at the wind until it finds music in the rhythm. Ari lies awake and counts the blanks in his poem the way a shepherd counts ewes, touching each absence to be sure it is present. The raven sleeps like a punctuation mark. In the morning, which is a word they do not say, they start again. The land rises. Snow becomes hard and thoughtful. Embedded in a drift, Noah finds a shard of ice as clear as honesty and shaped like a leaf. She turns it over. There, trapped like a moth in milk, is a small air bubble with corners. She gives it to Kettle. Proof that even air can be contained without complaint, she says. He tucks it in his belt, a talisman against running. At the first skirt of the mountain, the wind drops away too suddenly, and the silence left is not absence but audience. The slope is armored in black glaze, slick as church vows, the hermitage of unmelting breeze from within the shoulder of the world. Everything that does not move is gathered here to demonstrate how it is done. Brynja plants her staff and tests the near-invisible seam where glass becomes grip. Noah kneels and lays a palm flat. Knock with warmth, she reminds, and Ari brings the amber close. The bead thrums and the ice answers with that vowel he remembers from the river's patience, a sound that is almost a syllable, slightly curved, unpronounceable without humility. The raven hops between them and peers into the glaze until its one eye has had its fill of the future. Proverb, it announces, voice low, as if reluctant to spend it. Carry your heat like a lantern with the door open. Noted. Brynja says, and her breath fogs the ice. A tiny flower melt opens and then decides to live. They begin the climb. Kettle goes first now, because the slope asks for a man who knows how to lean without begging. He sets his weight, shifts, waits until the mountain consents in the small language of friction, then moves again. Noah taps her knuckles at each step he makes, and the ice remembers, accepting the repetition instead of punishing it. Ari follows, counting, listening, placing the nearly name in the hollow of his mouth, and not letting it out. Brynja comes last, watching the wind for mischief, watching the snow for grief. Behind them, the sea settles into a long, patient chair and decides, mercifully, to keep sitting. Halfway up, a blue crack opens beneath Kettle's boot, a mouth forming a word no one wants to hear. He freezes the way prey freezes, perfectly, and then unlearns it, inch by inch, replacing fear with geometry. Back, he whispers. There is a hollow. Ari lies flat and slides the amber into the crack. The hum goes down as if on a rope. Something below thinks about a new arrangement. The crack closes not with drama, but with thought. Kettle breathes again. I did not run, he says, surprised by his own body. Noah pats the ice. It notice. They reach a ledge. Not safety, permission. Before them, a dark arch opens into the mountain, the mouth of the hermitage. No doors, only thresholds. From within comes that disciplined cold that has never envied fire. Brynja touches a stone, and it is not stone. It is time made firm. Ari draws a pouch string and holds the bead where breath can pass across it. The raven, on Ari's shoulder, makes a sound that is not quite applause and not quite prayer. First proverb inside is mine by right. It warns. If the mountain keeps proverbs, Ari answers, we are already richer than language. They step into the arch, taking with them their oath, their debts, the map of wind, the habit of hive, and a bird who intends to steal wisdom the way children steal cherries. Openly, laughing, ready to be chased. Behind them, the sea creaks one last time, stands, and beneath a sky that remains deep and thoughtful, sits back down, as if agreeing to wait for a story worth ending. Gunveig's house arrives before they do, because houses with opinions have a way of correcting maps. They crest a drift, and there it is, ambling sidelong across the crust, its floorboard swaying like a tiredom, reindeer legs lifting and setting down with dignity that suggests long practice at not stepping on stories. Smoke curls from a chimney, the color of old pewter. Icicles hang from the eaves like organ pipes, each tuned to a different mood. The door has antlers instead of hinges. When it opens, it does so by remembering how to grow. Gunveig herself is the weather with a face. Her hair is the gray of ash that has already told its best story. Her eyes are the exact shade of water under lake ice when the sun is thinking of visiting. She laughs when they ask the name of winter, not unkindly, but the way a mountain would laugh if it had a throat. A warm noise traveling through cold stone. Children, she says, and it is not an insult. You've brought a raven to haggle for wisdom and an amber bead to hum at my stove. You've learned to stand together until breath becomes hive. And still you ask for a word as if a word were a key and not the doorframe itself. The house kneels for them. Reindeer legs flex, joints sigh, the whole structure dropping to the dignity of their stature. Inside, heat lives like a good rumor. Dried herbs hang over the hearth like green script. A pot mutters to itself in a dialect of summer. Gunveig ladles soup into wooden bowls rubbed with salt and patience. The first spoonful tastes like the day a scab falls off without fuss. The second like a hillside you rolled down as a child, and no one scolded you. The third is strawberries that ran out of manners and sun. Kettle shivers and looks angry at the kindness in his mouth. Brinja blinks, not at tears exactly, but at their polite ghost. Noah inhales and sets her bowl down, because patterns are easy to listen to when you are not busy wanting more. The raven perches on a hanging beam and pretends indifference until it cannot. Proverb. It pronounces, choosing one from the steam with a collector's greed. Eat warmth while it trusts you. Gunveig points a spoon at it. First pick, yes, but don't spend it all at once. The bird tucks the line beneath a wing and looks unbearably pleased with commerce. For a price. Gunveig says, and the room tightens as if it, too, knows bargains come dressed as meals. Ari's most joyful song. Ari's hand goes to the pouch on his chest and then stops. The song, she means, is not in there. It lives somewhere with sand underfoot and sunlight glued to skin. It's the one he never sang for anyone after Homri began misplacing the hour that forgives. It is his mother counting the names of tools in a rhythm that made the day get up and walk. It is a child's laugh the first time the sea admitted it was playing. Joy, he has learned, is an unrepeatable animal. To trade it away is like asking a fox not to be fox anymore. He meets Brinja's eyes. She does not tell him what to do. She is a woman who rows in weather and knows that some strokes belong to the person holding the oar. Ari stands. He does not tune the lyre because Joy hates to be fussed over. He does not announce. He lets the song happen. It starts at the top of his chest like a fin surfacing, then drops into the ribs where laughter lives between visits. It is not long. It is exact. It has holes where sunlight fits its fingers through and pulls. It is so little and so sufficient that when it ends a room does not move for a count of 4. Kettle sets his bowl down with care. He has never given it any belonging. Noah touches a rune stitched in her sleeve and feels it revise itself. Gunveig nods once. Fair. She wipes her spoon on the rim of the pot, as if closing a document. Then she leans on it like a staff, and for a heartbeat she looks like every woman who has ever held a house upright with the muscles in her back. Names hide where stories break, she says almost idly, as if giving the weather report. Fix the break, and a name may choose to be pronounced near you, or leave it open so truth can pass through and not get stuck. Your choice. But you will not find a name in a tale that has never learned to limp. The raven fluffs. Proverb, it churs, greedy for rights. A straight road forgets the places where help lives. Gunveig flicks a glance upward. Keep it, thief. Brinja's hand is already on a coil of rope, not because she plans to throw it, but because this is how she thinks. Where, she asks, practical as prayer, have our stories broken? Woman, Gunveig says, delighted. You were born with a compass that runs on verbs. She gestures around the room as if pointing to a map only she can see. Look at where your people stutter. The beached whale you call a hull. 7 nets went into the sea and 6 came out. You built a roof from a failure and try to convince yourselves it was only a door. The day of 7 nets broke your village's tongue. You carved your meals under its ribs and pretended that felt like shelter. Or, and here she peers at Noah as at a line that refuses to settle. Think of the pattern you lost the winter the midwives made a bonfire on the harbor ice. The ash fell in the shapes of letters no one knew, and you turn your face away, because grief hates new alphabets. That is a break. Or you can walk where the echo returns before the call. There is a gully like that to the north, and the reindeer won't cross it. Or, enough, Noah says softly, not as refusal, but as acknowledgement that options multiply in the presence of need. We cannot mend every tear. Choose the rip that all others snag on. She looks to Ari then, not for leadership, but for the habit he's grown of listening until a path volunteers. The day of 7 nets, Ari says, because a whale spine humming in salt air has been under all their sentences for years. It broke us cleanly enough to use. Kettle's knuckles remember a rope burn and go white. That day, he says, voice bereft, I watched a master tie a knot around man's hunger and call it a wage. I left the village that night and ran, without knowing I was running from a broken story. If we go back to the place where that tale tore, I will not run. I will learn the tears grammar. Gunveig stirs the soup to hide her smile, or perhaps to add another season to the broth. Take this, she says, and puts a small object in Ari's palm. A spoon carved from driftbone. Its bowl thin as ice at new moon. It is not for eating. Hold it in your fist and walk until it begins to sing. It will sing where a story has been silenced. Not wounded, silenced. Different ailments, different medicines. The spoon hums faintly, a cousin to the amber bead, shy to be heard under company. Ari closes his hand, and the hum becomes persuasion he can feel in his wrist. The raven leans and considers stealing it. Not a proverb. It decides sadly. A tool. Boring. Gunveig snorts. Tools are how proverbs pay rent. They eat the last of the soup. Gunveig's house, having listened, stands of its own accord, reindeer legs flexing without complaint. She walks him to the door that grows itself open. You will not win against winter by naming it, she says. You will not win at all. You will change into something winter recognizes as kin, and then it will be rude to stay. Rudeness is all that ever ends a season, the world's courtesy to balance. She kisses the top of the raven's head, and the bird pretends to hate it. One more. It wheedles, flicking a glance at Ari's emptied pockets where the song used to live. Gunveig relents. Proverb. Pay gladly for what you cannot keep. The raven preens like a magistrate. They thank her in a new village way, by not naming gratitude, so it is room to breathe. Outside, the sky has discovered one additional shade of consideration. Snow sifts down like erased chalk. The house steps aside and watches him leave with all 4 knees bent in benediction. They travel southeast along the seam where lakes dream of becoming sea. The bone spoon sleeps in Ari's hand, until it doesn't. At first the hum is a rumor in his palm. Then it pours a small river sound up the bones of his forearm and makes a harbor beneath his collarbone. The raven cocks its head. There, it says, and for once wastes no proverb on obvious. They crest a ridge of wind-bitten snow and see the coast's black ribs surfaced like a drowned book. The place the old men called Widow's Teeth stands in a crooked jaw. Beyond it, the long slope where the whale came ashore during the day of 7, Nets glitters with the memory of that wait. Nets still sleep there under the skin of ice. Green lines frozen into a lace that did not consent. The spoon in Ari's fist begins to sing, a silver, narrow thing like a child trying very hard not to cry. Bryn just slows without being told. Kettle looks like a man returning to the house, in which he broke a chair, and learned it was a person. They find the post where rope burned and did not speak. They find the notch where the tide took what was owed and more. They find footprints preserved by chance and cold. Men who have since died, men who refused to, a boy who believed his hands were only for hauling. Noah sets down her pouch and does not draw runes. She listens to the silence Gunveig warned them about and hears its thesis. Here, she says, a story decided to stop being true. Not wrong, tired. What does a men look like? Kettle asks, eyes never leaving the nets under glass. We can splice rope. We can stitch skin. What is the stitch for a tale? Witness that doesn't punish, Brynja says, and she is surprised by her own answer. She kneels and begins to brush snow from the frozen mesh, as if she were freeing a sleeping child's hair burrs. Ari kneels beside her. He does not sing, Not the joyful song, not anything shaped like a demand. He puts the amber bead on the ice and cups his hand over it until a small room of warmth opens. The spoon in his fist harmonizes, and the sound goes down into the green web, where fishermen once made hours into money and called it righteousness. The raven stands on a broken float and keeps very still. It has nothing clever to say to this. Noah takes a sliver of obsidian and lays it flat. In its black, she watches a reflection of what might be a different telling. Kettle unloops the rope from his belt and offers it barehanded to the part of himself that would have run. "Stay," he says to that boy, and because he says it without contempt, the boy stays. Names hide where stories break. Gunveig had said, the ice listens to their unpunishing witness, and under it something that has been refusing to move, for fear of being dragged, shifts by a hand's width, enough to let truth slide through without catching. Ari feels like the first click, when a stuck latch decides has been asked with the right politeness. He does not hear a word. He hears the shape a word would make in the mouth if the mouth belonged to a season. He does not reach for it. He opens a place in himself where it could sit without being possessed. The sea answers, creaking like the old man it is, and decides for now to stand. The wind, passing the upper registers, slows long enough to drop a map no one needs anymore. The spoon in Ari's hand quiets. The amber hum rolls back to the pitcher hive. Brynja breathes out a laugh that isn't laughter and leaves it alone so it doesn't startle. Noah draws nothing on the snow and is pleased with the accuracy. The raven, who has been almost saintly for 3 minutes, cannot help itself. Proverb, it whispers, reverent for once. Mend the place where the rope cut you, and water will forget your name. It tucks the line away with care, as if even it knows some sentences are better carried than spent. They stand, for mortals and a bird, on the slope where their village learned to eat under a broken roof and call it shelter. The sky is still a deep, thoughtful blue, but somewhere in it is a hinge oiling itself. They do not say they have found winter's true name. They have not. They have found how to hear it clearing its throat in the distance. Next, Brynja says, because a compass made of verbs dislikes idleness. Ari nods toward the north gully where echoes return too soon. Break upon break, he says, and he is not discouraged. He has learned to respect a long repair. Kettle tightens his belt, not as armor but as reminder. Noah lifts her pouch and lets patterns form later. The way snow lets footsteps narrate after the fact. They turn from the day of 7 nets and begin to walk, carrying a spoon that sings near silences, a bead that remembers sunlight, a promise of the wind, and a gap where Ari's most joyful song used to be, now grown into a quiet that can hold a season's name without dropping it. Behind them, the whale hall on the headland seems less like a wound pretending to be a cathedral and more like a collarbone on which a village can balance its head. The house on reindeer legs is a small shape far off, already walking towards someone else who will need soup that tastes like a childhood they didn't know they still owned. The sound is clotted with flows and breath. It does not open so much as allow us to thread. They stand at its lip and watch the water heave like a chest that has decided sleep is the most responsible thing it can do. Then a back surfaces, black and grooved, wide as a hill under satin. Another follows, and another, a procession of slumbering islands drifting in a corridor too narrow for any honest boat. Brynja listens to the gap between their breaths the way a midwife listens to the silence between contractions. "Now," she says, and steps out, not on ice, not on certainty, but on the quiet that whales make when they choose to rest. The skin under her boot yields and holds, warm with a warmth that has nothing to do with fire. "Keep your weight soft," she says. "Spread it with your thinking before your feet arrive." Kettle mimics the posture with the care of a man who has been punished by hardness and now trusts softness like a new employer. Ari follows, amber humming at his chest. Not loud, not pushy, only a polite, steady hospitality, and the raven lifts with a single beat and paces them from above, counting spouts like beads. A spindrift of spray salts their faces. The air tastes of old iron and fresh oath. Within the sound, the world's voice is lower. Even wind speaks in the register of promise. The whales roll beneath them, great clockwork gentled by sleep. Between backs, narrow lanes of dark water lie like closed eyelids. They move in synchrony with choreography the sea must have taught to anyone who ever asked politely. Brynja's voice walks before them. Left, pause, wait for the sigh. Step, right, heel first, then kindness. Halfway across, when the lane tightens and a barnacled ridge demands respect, Kettle speaks without breath to spare. I once belonged to a man who burned Homri's sister village, he says, as if he were announcing the weather that has already happened. We salted their racks and fed lies to their nets. He called it thinning competition. I called it staying alive. I hammered my name into the shape of his orders and wore it crooked. He waits till the whales rise, then continues. If we succeed, they will have time to remember what I helped erase. Exile is fair. I will not run from it. No one answers at once because answers are heavy on water. The whale under Noah blows a thin, sleepy plume and she flinches, not from fear but from the intimacy of being breathed on by a cathedral. She draws her glove off with her teeth and presses 2 fingers to the seam of her tongue. She tastes copper, old and specific, the flavor of the rune she is about to commit. With the same fingers she sketches at taste in the air and then on the back of the whale, a small shape that means not shield, not wall, but remember where your strength goes when it returns. The taste blooms under everyone's tongues, metallic, grounding, like biting a coin you distrust. Protection, she says, that doesn't ask the danger to stop being itself, only asks it to mind its manners. The rune holds as long as true attention holds. Brynja nods once, approval spent like exact change. Kettle, she says, measuring her steps with words, if exile is a price, we will not haggle. But the village does not speak with one mouth anymore. It breathes together. Let us finish teaching it to breathe. Then bring your confession and see whether breath chooses to make room. She turns her head slightly to keep her voice from startling the sleeping engine below. I do not promise forgiveness. I promise audience. Ari says nothing yet. He stores Kettle's confession where he stored the almost syllable, on a shelf that will not shake when named. He places his foot on the next back and feels the whales dream through the leather. Kelp forest that wrote letters to light. A long road under the skin of the sea. The patient grammar of migrating without suspecting words for it. The bead at his chest agrees and hums an answer fitted to the curve of this moment. The raven, above, cannot help itself. Proverb. It calls softly, respectful of the sleepers. A truth told on moving water arrives kinder. It tucks the line under its wing as if stowing a bright fish. They come to a head, scarred and white at the rostrum, rising where 2 currents argue. The scar is old, the kind that turns injury into instruction. Brynja kneels and lays her palm on it. Thank you, she says aloud, because gratitude, when unhidden, can be a bridge. The whale answers by not answering, which is the most generous reply some giants can give. A floe spins near the gap they must cross next, then ice glazing its edge like a bad idea. Kettle measures distance with a pirate's eye that has learned accounting. 3 steps, he says, then a reach. Noah checks the rune at her throat, the one she seldom uses because it changes the weight of silence. Not that one, the raven warns, as if it could read her interior sleeve. It tastes like iron falling. She chooses differently, scratches a shape on her boot with her thumbnail, and steps. The boot finds honesty on slickness. The copper on their tongues grows brighter, and then recedes, a pulse rather than a stain. The last backs are closer together, a kindness that makes ankles sloppy if you let it. Brynja keeps them exact with the old cadence. Now, breathe. The whale's breaths lift them. The whale's rests hold them. Ari thinks of all the names he has wasted on metaphors for steadiness and rejects them. This is not a metaphor. This is an animal choosing to be a continent for a moment. When they spill onto firm ice on the far side, the sound exhales a rope of fog and ties it in a knot between headlands. The whales submerge without ceremony, carrying the copper taste with them into the deep, where metals tell longer stories. Kettle stands and looks back. His pulse climbs out of his neck and tries to be sky. I carried fire for a man who loved it more than anything, he says to the water that is now surface again. I will carry water for whoever asks me to put it out. It is a vow that chooses its own ears. They move inland where drifts lean like sleeping sheep. The ice underfoot changes from black glass to a white, well-argued crust that approves of their weight if they explain each step. The raven lands on Noah's shoulder and pecks at a crust of salt in her hair. Another, it encourages, greedy for the next entry in its ledger. Noah smiles without showing teeth. Proverb, she says, as if feeding it from her own pocket. Do not judge the ferry by the oar, but by the shore your feet find. The bird considers, then accepts, tucking it away with proprietary neatness. They enter a field of pressure ridges stacked like failed promises. Everywhere the ice is broken and rebroken, then fuse into new arguments. Gunveig's clue hums in Ari's head. Names hide where stories break, and he feels the bone spoon stir in his fist again. The copper taste remains faint now, a suggestion of caution. He stops at a ridge that has folded over itself and turned blue in the fold, the kind of blue that knows how to keep a secret. He presses the spoon to it. The hum threads into the seam. The ridge speaks. A small pop, a settling sigh, the release of a tension the world forgot to carry forward. Here, he says, another fracture, another chance to listen without punishing. Brynja plants her staff and looks outward and inward at once. The sound gave us passage because we accepted its sleepers, she says. The mountain will give us audience because we have learned to walk on what refuses to be rode. The village will give us judgment because judgment is what villages do, and we will stand under it because standing is what we promise on the black ice. She turns to Kettle without sentence, only a look that contains room for several futures. Ari loosens the pouch string and lifts the bead just enough to warm the seam. It hums at the same pitch as whales breathe. The ridge eases like a muscle that has outlived its reason for clenching. Noah licks her lips, copper again but sweeter now, as if the rune has found a way to season truth. The raven tilts its head, listening for a proverb in the settling. Not this time, Ari tells it, and the bird, astonished, accepts the absence as a kind of wisdom. Beyond the ridges the world opens into a white amphitheater. Far at its rim, the dark mouth of the hermitage waits, the vowel of the hidden river audible if you hold your breath and let the ear ask instead of the mind. They shoulder their debts and resumes and walk toward that listening. Above them the sky remains a thoughtful blue of a bruise considering forgiveness. Beneath their tongues, copper fades to the taste of snow. Between their ribs, a new steadiness arranges itself. No word yet, but the shape a true word will need when it chooses to be pronounced near them. The glaciers awake before they know it, a long, listening animal stretched across the valley with his white ear pressed to the bones of the world. It breathes in a register that teeth can hear. Snow lifts and settles on its hide in small, judicial nods. When they speak, the ice answers in the old catechism of doubt, returning every sentence as a question with the edges sharpened. We have come to ask. Ari begins, and the glacier throws it back thinner. Have you? Brynja names a wind that leans along the ridge, and the ice replies with a tone that means, or do you only think you do? Kettle says his name, the one he is growing into, and hears it return with the quick bruise of maybe. Even Noah's runes, which seldom ask permission, steam from her palm and turn hesitant in the air, pausing before they land as if uncertainty were gravity. The sastrugi here become script, ribs of snow writing the same clause over and over. Consider. Their boots squeak the way boots do when the cold has opinions. The hermitage mouth waits above them, a dark vowel in stone, but the glacier owns the approach. The floor of the world, polished by centuries of slow patience and the weight of other winters. The raven flits from hummock to hummock, feathers slicked with a varnish of frost it pretends to ignore. Proverb, it begins, and the glacier flicks even that into a parenthetical. Or perhaps not, and the bird snaps its bill shut, annoyed to be edited by geology. Ari tries the craft he was born to, because that is what men do when the ground goes complicated. They turn to the instrument their hands remember in the dark. He pulls the lyre from his back and lets it would remember a summer tree. His voice swims out, lines cut square to the current. A poem of openings, a measure the old skulls tied around ravines to coax them wider, a couplet that is a lever. The first rhyme arrives obedient as a dog out of habit. But when the answering line reaches for its echo, sound hits a skin of cold, so pure it separates vowels from consonants. The rhyme fails by a finger's width, then by a hand's, then breaks entirely. Words stumble short of each other, teeth on glass. A thin frost feathers the air between his mouth and the ice. Syllables hang there like trapped gnats, their little wings beating, then settle in a soft, silvery fall. He tastes the metallic sting of embarrassment. The glacier sends a failed rhyme back, not mocking, only exacting. Or is your poem only a way to hear yourself? Language is freezing, Noah says, which is not metaphor but diagnosis. She rubs her thumb along her tongue, looking for the copper that means protection will take. It does, dimly, as if the rune is tasting an instrument that has sat too long in a shed. Bryn just steps close enough to Ari that her shoulder warms his sleeve. Try the words without the clothing, she murmurs. Tool names, hand words. Wind won't rhyme them, and ice won't mishear them as boasts. He says heave, slack, hold, wait, and the glacier allows them through without turning them into questions. Not because it respects them, but because they are small, honest, and tired of listening to themselves. Kettle kneels and lays his palm on the blue rind where the glacier thickens, into something that is not quite matter and not quite time. He has stopped asking anything of anyone. He lets wait do the introduction. I came to be measured, he says to the cold. The echo that returns is not doubt, but arithmetic. The quiet count of scars and pauses. The ledger of a man who wants to be less expensive to the world. The ice accepts arithmetic the way a priest accepts confession, with no promise of absolution, only the gift of being correctly heard. The raven, whose job description insists on curiosity, hops to a seam in the glacier where winter has filed itself to a keen edge. For comparison, it says, with the prissiness of a scholar about to steal a footnote, and leans to pry free a clear shard, an index of this cold, a measure can set against the memory of other ices. The shard is glassy, almost laughing in its smoothness. When the beak closes on it, the laughter stops. Frost races up the keratin like a rumor through a village. The raven jerks back too late. Its beak stays ungenerous as iron in December. A small panic sound, uncharacteristic, humiliating, comes out of the bird, and its one eye goes old with fear. Brynja is there in the space between heartbeats. She does not tug, because tugging will keep the beak in two places at once. She cups, breathes, and lays the heel of her bare hand against black. Noah smears tallow from a twisted cloth onto the seam where ice is wetting beak, then draws fast and small a rune that is less fire than recall. Not flame, but the instruction for warm to remember itself. Copper rises under all their tongues, sharp as bitten coin. The bond loosens with an obscene little kiss. You will not do that again. Bryn just says to the raven as if to a child who has licked a yoke ring, and the bird, indignant, grateful, pretending neither, clacks softly in agreement and backs away, the tip of its beak blanched. Proverb, it manages, chastened. Do not prove a point with your face. The glacier lets even that pass without turning it into a question. Ari coils the failed rhyme back into his chest and tries something else. The bone spoon in his fist hums toward a seam veiled in drift, the place where a story has been silenced rather than wounded. He crouches and presses spoon to ice. The hum sinks straight down, thin as a needle. The glacier answers with an echo of doubt again, but fainter, as if the doubt has discovered it is not the only law here. We should speak by not speaking, he says, and hears the ice attempt to return it as, or can you, and then, almost grudgingly, accept the suggestion. He looks at Brynja and Kettle and Noah. Breath, he says simply. They arrange themselves as they did at the day of 7 nets. Shoulders touching, ribs working in a rhythm that remembers hive. The amber bead warms under Ari's hand until a small room opens in the cold, not defying it, only inviting it to sit differently. Their exhalations sink, as if the glacier has decided to drink them rather than shove them back. The echo of doubt fights like a habit. Each time it rises, Brynja names a verb and lays it under breath. Each time it retreats, Kettle presses his palm blue and lets his pulse count without shame. Each time it mutters, Noah lays a thread of pattern so unassuming it looks like nothing. 2 scratches, a pause, a scratch that doesn't close. Leave it open, she says under her breath, remembering Gunvague. Let truth move through. Ari closes his eyes and raises a poem without words, a long, disciplined silence shaped to catch a syllable if one chooses to fall. The glacier changes the kind of listening it is doing. Doubt is still in it. Doubt is the muscle that keeps ice from believing everything that wishes to pass. But the echo loses its appetite for theft. Sound returns not as interrogation, but as mirror, what they put in, and again, slightly blued by distance. There, Noah whispers, tasting the copper thinning to clean snow. It's answering us with the shape of our asking, not the hook. Brynja nods once and sets the rhythm of their shoulders the way she would set a crew at the start of a long pull. The bead hums lower. The spoon stops humming at all, satisfied, perhaps, that this silence is not a wound but a mouth. Ari tries one line, unadorned and honest as a tool. We do not want to own the word. The glacier sends it back with no question marks attached. He risks another. We will carry it only in our breath. The return is exact and cool and, for the first time, consenting. A line of frost that had been clinging to official releases in a glittering sigh and falls as a handful of brittle stars. Something in the deep loosens by the width of a palm. They all feel it, the way a stuck door feels when the wood confesses a season has changed elsewhere in the house. The raven, having recovered enough arrogance to be itself, stands at Ari's boot and studies the new glitter. For comparison, it says again very dignified, and this time pluck a shard only from the fallen frost, making a show of not touching the living edge. Noah inspects the beak with professional gentleness. You will keep the scar, she tells it. Let it teach you humility when cleverness gets hungry. The bird allows the examination, wounded pride stitched with relief. Humility is heavy, it complains. So is your head, Brynja says without malice, and the raven mutters an obscene little blessing in the dialect of roofs. Words begin to behave like themselves again, in the limited, mortal way that has always been enough when coupled with decent breath. Ari speaks in prose as clean as a deck in the first light that no one can name. We are here to hear. We are here to borrow shape. We are here to return it. The glacier returns each line with a temperature change under their boots rather than a tone, which is as close as an old ice can get to nodding when it has promised never to bow. A hairline appears between two blue plains with no drama, only inevitability. A seam like a thought that finally decides itself. It runs a little, then stops, waiting for courtesy. They do not force it. They breathe to it. Noah etches in the air the modest rune. That means let this remain a door, not a wound. And she does it with 2 fingers only, as if any additional insistence would bruise the moment. The copper taste returns and fades, a tide and not a command. Kettle threads a line across the opening not to restrain it, but to remind human bodies they are brief. Brynja whispers counts she learned teaching children to climb nets. 1 for your hand, 1 for your foot, 1 for the promise you will make after. The glacier accepts this choreography with the fairness of a judge who likes being surprised by mercy. Around them, the world remembers what to do with syllables. The air loses the brittle habit of catching them mid-flight. Rhymes, if Ari wanted them, would come, but he doesn't ask. He keeps the language bare, verbs, nouns, a few good prepositions, and lets the music be the unison of mortal lungs and the small blue consent of something that could have erased them and didn't. Far off, the dark mouth of the hermitage listens. Beneath their soles, a river practices staying and, at the edges, admits to a thought of motion, not to be acted on, only to be kept for later. Do you hear it? Ari asks, and for once the glacier returns the words without trimming them into suspicion. The echo is simply yes in the language of pressure. He puts his hand on the ice, and his palm comes away dry. No frost gathering to punish the touch, no slick contempt. The raven leans and whispers, partly to the shard tucked beneath its wing, partly to itself, partly to whatever keeps old things patient. Proverb, ask without heat, and even the cold will lend you its shape. The glacier lets the sentence stand. The beak keeps its color. The wind up on the ridge stows its claws and walks on its pads. They leave no names carved, no claims. The seam they have made is a modest thing, a crease where a story might bend to admit a later chapter. They step back together, careful as thieves returning a jewel after learning the thrill was not worth a ransom. Brynja signs the air with a closed hand, the signal that means enough for now. Kettle takes one last look at the blue depth and does not imagine throwing any man into it to watch him vanish. Noah pockets a memory of how the doubt sounded when it forgot itself. Ari, whose poem knew better than to insist on finishing, folds its unspoken end back into breath. Behind them, the glacier sighs, not a capitulation, not fatigue, only the small contentment of a long listener who has found a group willing to speak softly. Ahead, the mouth of the hermitage waits with its disciplined cold and the vowel they have chased from rumor to almost. The air between feels less hostile to singing. Even the raven tries a note and winces when it cracks, then tries again and keeps it playing. Language is not thawed, exactly. It has remembered that it owes no one perfection, only the courtesy of meaning, when called gently. They find the cavern by accident the way the living always do, following a draft that smelled faintly of old apples and cold stone until the drift opened its mouth and invited them to be smaller. Their lanterns behaved politely at the threshold and then refused to be seen. Light swallowed by a darkness that preferred to do its own housekeeping. They entered anyway, backs brushing the thoughts of rock, frost hanging in thin ferns from the ceiling like breasts that decided to become plants. Brinja went first with her hand on the wall, as if greeting a very large, very tired animal. Kettle carried the rope in loops that made sense to his fingers, even when sight gave up. Noah counted steps in a pattern that kept fear busy. The raven rode Ari's shoulder, heavier than usual, as if the dark added attacks. The floor sloped gently to a room that had not been built so much as remembered by the mountain. There they saw tables of stone and benches worn smooth by a traffic of patience. No food showed, but the air was full of eating sounds, small pleasures, the clatter of wooden spoons that were not present, the murmur of gratitude given to no host. Families sat together in shades of posture, outlines soft as breath on glass. The dead were not terrifying. They were busy. A thin woman balanced nothing in her palm and shared it with a child who smiled at the exact right moment for sweetness. An old man kept refilling a cup that stayed full of emptiness. A pair of lovers sat facing each other and practiced the ancient art of deciding not to look away. The cavern held their speech and sent none of it back. The living halted at the edge of that soft congregation. The raven made a tiny sound and tucked its head, suddenly unsure of the rights of messengers in a place where messages no longer needed routes. A figure near the head of the largest stone table turned, and Ari's name arrived without sound, like a cloak draped across his shoulders by hands he knew, before he knew them. Others turned, and that act itself was welcome. No rush, no accusation, only the attention the living ache for and seldom earn. The dead demand tales as payment. The old stories warned, and payment was required now. A man with a nose set twice and badly, a fisher by the shape of his patience, lifted a hand and laid it palm up on air. The gesture said give. The tables quieted. Invisible spoons stopped midair as if manners were a religion here. The dead wanted stories the way the living want bread. Not for entertainment, but for strength and hospitality and the proving of kinship. Ari stepped forward because he was the one who carried the trade most openly. The bone spoon in his fist hummed approval at the exchange. He did not ask what they preferred. He did not select from his proudest works. He told simpler things, endings he would have written for each of them. The book had let him keep the pen. For the fisher with a broken nose, he offered a last haul that was not a miracle, only adequate, and the small pleasure of walking home with a weight that was enough. For the thin woman, he offered a night when the child's fever went down because someone laughed in the next room. For the old man, he offered a cup that was light to lift. For the lovers, he gave them one argument that turned midway into a joke because each heard the other's fear before it grew teeth. He did not lie. He bent truth the way a good hand warms a knot. He took the jagged edges of their real endings and found places where kindness could have fit without breaking anything else. He spoke as if the world had forgotten one or two courtesies and could be reminded without shame. Around him, invisible plates emptied in time with his sentences. The dead ate what he told them, not to feel hunger, but to remember the taste of being seen by a future that did not punish them for having been mortal. One spirit stood slowly at the far end of the table. Ari knew the way her weight sat in hips, the way her hands made bowls of themselves when listening, the slant of the head that meant both skepticism and love. He had carried the architecture of her absence for years like a house that refused to collapse. Now she was here, ordinary as breath. He did not say mother because the word was a fragile boat, and he was in the habit of rescuing boats too late. He bowed his head, and it was enough. She came nearer the way some birds come near, testing the air between two hearts to see if it's safe to cross. "Have you kept your laughter?" she asked without moving her mouth, which is to say the question appeared at the exact place inside him where the truth could answer without defense. He had not. He had set his laughter down the day the village misplaced its first hour and never remembered where he left it. He had used a serious mouth to solder cracks in other people's days. He had rehearsed jokes and not let them happen. He had put away the small animal that lived in him that wanted to roll in ferns and shout at hills. He wanted to apologize and did not, because apologies often put the wrong person in the center of the room. She reached up and touched his cheek the way she used to wipe flour from it when he came into her baking. From her palm came a sound like a cork agreeing to loosen under polite fingers. Then a small bright thing. No object, no light, just a sensation. Stepped back into him and stretched. It was not hysterical or showy. It was his laughter, the particular one he had kept as a boy, the one with the two-step at the end, the one that always made other people laugh too, because it sounded like permission. He did not make a noise. Every part of his face made the memory of that noise and trembled. He wept in relief, simple and unadorned, tears behaving like old dogs who know exactly what a hearth is and go there. The weeping was not an embarrassment in that room. The dead do not mind water. Bryn just stood beside him and held the rope like it was a hand. Kettle turned his face away, so the moment would not feel observed and therefore smaller. Noah tapped her sternum twice, the private sign she used when a patter made sense across two worlds. The raven leaned forward on his shoulder and watched with dignity it usually misplaced. Payment continued. Some of the dead brought their own stories to the table and pushed them across for inspection. A woman showed Ari the night she had forgiven her sister and forgotten to tell anyone because forgiveness often chooses privacy. He gave that night a witness, then gave it a lantern. A boy showed him the moment he lied about a fish and then hid the truth in his pillow like a saint hides a tooth. Ari gave him a version in which he told the truth and was forgiven, then kept the lie anyway as practice for better honesty later. The dead did not want revision so much as companionship. He walked alongside their facts and offered shade. "Your price?" asked the broken-nosed man when Ari paused to breathe. Ari shook his head and put his hand over the pouch at his chest where the amber warmed, where the village's breath sat like a traveling hearth. "This is my price paid," he said. "To say a thing kindly enough that kindness remembers me later." The man nodded with the pragmatism of someone who had lost all his nets and lived. Brynja added a tale of her own that the dead seemed to accept as legal tender. The story of a storm that changed his mind because a crew kept singing the wrong song on purpose until the right one got jealous and came. Kettle, called by a face among the shades he recognized from the day of fire, confessed properly, then told the ending he wants. To be trusted with carrying water and to spill none of it on the way. The face listened, turned to the others, and the table bent briefly toward Mercy like reeds in a wind that could be named if anyone dared. Noah did not tell a story. She drew a crooked line on the stone with a wet finger and let it evaporate while everyone watched. When it vanished, they all felt the place it had been, as if a thought had stepped out and left its warm chair. The dead murmured appreciation for someone who understood how much of their lives now consisted of keeping edges from hardening. The cavern shifted around them without moving, the ceiling lowered enough to feel intimate, then raised just enough to let singing pass. Voices began around a braid, simple as bread and as various. The dead sang not to show off, but to make an inside larger. They ate what was not there and were filled. The living breathed hive again without being told, and discovered that in such company breath learned to be an instrument. Ari's laughter returned properly then, not as a trickle but as a reliable spring. And when he laughed, the dead laughed too, pleased to discover a sound they had not needed in a while. His mother pressed her forehead to his the way she had once measured fever. "Keep it," she said, and the word placed itself in him next to all the others he was trying to carry without owning. He wanted to ask if she was proud, if he had been a good son, if he had misused language the way he feared. She did not answer questions he could not survive. She cupped his face, the exact heft of those old hands, and put into his mouth the taste of apple cores and dough scrap and the panic laughter that follows a near accident when everyone is fine. He understood then that he had been asking Winter to leave before he had offered the joke that let a seasoned save face. "Take something," the broken-nosed man said suddenly, as if remembering hospitality. The living never come empty-handed. They looked around for what would not be theft. There were no objects here that would endure sunlight. Noah found a solution that satisfied etiquette. She asked each family for a useless detail, a fragment that had nowhere else to live. A particular way a certain aunt tied her kerchief when she meant business. The sound of laugh made a roof in south wind. The smell of wool dried too quickly. They gathered those and tucked them in the humming bead like notes pasted into a traveling book. The amber did not protest. It had room for such inheritances. The raven, who had a right to first pick of any proverb, found none he could eat and so created one under his breath, careful not to spend it all at once. With a dead choose hunger, feed them endings. He preened as if this counted as scholarship, and no one denied him. When they rose to leave, no one impeded them. The dead did not cling. They had practice in the art of letting go. Ari's mother stayed at the edge of the lamplight that refused to show itself and lifted her hand, not in farewell, but in the sign she used to make when she wanted him to keep his voice down during someone else's story. He understood and promised. Brinja bowed to all four compass points of the cavern and thanked the weather of grief for behaving. Kettle placed his palm on the stone table and let the last heat of his living skin seat itself there as a record. Noah breathed across her fingertip and touched the wall. A thin film of frost drew the shape of her touch and kept it for a minute before reconsidering. They climbed toward the dimness that counts as day and found their lanterns again where they had left them, burning the whole time without achieving attention. Outside, the air felt new not because it had changed, but because they had. Ari's chest had a place in it that did not echo when he laughed. When he tried the sound, it came out low and true and traveled ahead of them like a scout. The raven jerked at the suddenness of joy and then pretended it had expected it. Brinja's mouth went aside where smiles like to warm themselves. Kettle rolled his shoulders as if a yoke he could not name had loosened. Noah lifted her hand to feel the small wind that runs along the snow just above the crust and said nothing. Pleas had been paid in silence she could spend later. They did not look back because gratitude in this country travels forward. Behind them the cavern resumed its work. Invisible spoons resumed their clatter. Families finished meals made of memory and song. And in the deep, where the world keeps the names it has not decided to pronounce, something shifted by the width of a syllable toward a sound that could be called an answer when the living were ready to hear it without insisting. They saw it first as a weather that had made up its mind, an eddy on the horizon the size of a town, lifting and lowering itself like a thought that wouldn't let go. As they neared, the shape declares particulars, a fortress spun from cloud and antler, bastions braided from shed tines and rime, galleries of hoarfrost laced together with wind so taut the air sang through it, antlers a length of longboats locked into crownwork, points gloved in ice, tips pricked with captive lightning that blinked like patient eyes. The whole citadel revolved, a slow, judicial rotation that let every side take a turn at facing the world. Snow drifted out of its parapets and scrolls that wrote themselves and vanished. The fortress hummed at a pitch that seemed to tune their bones, reminding each thigh and rib of how to hold against weather without growing hard. The raven folded its wings and flattened itself against Ari's hood, for once unwilling to be a silhouette against a god's window. Proverb. It said anyway, quietly, needs must. Never bow to a door, it might be a mouth. No one shushed it. The fortress might be both. They stepped into a corridor made of moving air. No stones kept anything up. The architecture wore nothing but its own insistence. Underfoot, the wind combed itself into a floor, loose as fur, tight as habit. Above, antlers clicked against antlers with the soft authority of old king's greeting. The breath they'd learned to braid in Homry found a rhythm here without being told. The amber bead warmed at Ari's chest, offering a small, household steadiness to a palace that had no floor. The Jarl of Winds approached by becoming the corridor. He was not a man so much as a grammar change, a cloak of whether where a person should be, boots made of packed drift that left prints only on pride. When he spoke, the gusts arranged themselves to carry meaning across gaps. Consonants shouldered him by squalls. Vowels lay like silk by channels of warm air that had lost their way and found employment. Winter shed its name to grow immortal, he said, and every banner cloud on the ramparts furled an inch in deference to the sentence. I will not give back what it refused. The words came without spite, like a weather report delivered by a mountain. He had long memory in him, the sort that is not nostalgia, but ledger. The fortress turned another slow degree. Bryn just squared herself until the wind stopped trying to push her and began to lean on her as an equal does against a friend at a doorframe. We don't ask the name, Ari answered, keeping his voice plain, the way one talks to waves when one needs them to consider a compromise. We ask for a path. The Jarl's beard, which was the abstraction of frost drawn by children with clean fingernails on window glass, tilted as if to catch a better angle of their intention. Paths belong to place, he said. I carry them. I did not plant them. His eyes were the colors of skies seen from under ice by a seal who has learned the courtesy of not dying. Brynja's hand tightened on the coil at her hip. It wasn't anger. It was a particular grip of a woman who has seen a current pretend to be a road and refuses to be fooled. Race me, she said, because in her country verbs court truth better than nouns. The gusts paused. 1,000 small flags inside the fortress forgot which way was their assignment. Across the air, she clarified, as if the suggestion required ordinary words to make it legal. If I win, you show us a path. Not the name, not power, just the way a boat might go that is not water. The Jarl considered in all directions at once, the way weather does when it checks with fields and cliffs and the quiet backs of oxen before pronouncing. What do you wager? He said at last, and a squall placed punctuation in the corner like a period with a hat. My oar call, Brynja answered without blinking. The one the young hear in their bones even before their arms learn it. I will untie from my throat, and you may carry it in storms. Children will hear it and think wind can row. Kettle made a sound, not protest, but grief for the size of the coin offered. Noah looked at the Jarl and saw him measuring not the boast but the price. Ari closed his palm on the bead and felt the village's breath tighten, then relax, like a muscle that trusts a decision made without it. Accepted, the Jarl said. If you lose, the call is mine. If you win, I will show you a path that stays where it is put long enough to be used once. He raised a hand, and the fortress slowed, then aligned itself as a racetrack aligns. 2 long streets of sky parsed between antler towers, gates opening and closing at the far end like eyelets to mark a finish line that wasn't there until he said it was. Noah bent to the air and drew runes no hand could see, the pattern you make when you wish a corridor to remember not to wander. The taste of copper touched their tongues, then diluted into something clearer, like snowmelt. I will keep the wind honest by telling it where its edges are, she said. The Jarl smiled in a way that belonged to Cliff Shadow. Even gods like being surprised by good manners. Kettle unrolled the sealskin and lashed light slats to light slats. Fingers producing a craft from almost nothing. We won't have hull, he said, so we'll have to have habit. Stand as you stand on an apology. Brynja laughed softly, the laugh of a person for whom 2 good truths had just shaken hands. Ari unwrapped his lyre and tightened the string until it hummed at a pitch that made ropes think of being loyal. Boats appeared because the suggestion had nowhere else to go. There were less boats than the memory of boats. Frames caught in whalebone logic, ribs of air lashed together with lines of sound. Sails were woven from gusts and patience. They took shape only when looked at sidelong. The Jarl stepped into a vessel that wasn't, placed his feet like a man testing old boards in a familiar wharf, and nodded. Brynja stepped into hers and felt the wind consider her balance, decided approved, and become floor where her weight asked politely. On your first breath, the Jarl said, not mine, yours. They breathed together, for mortals and a raven trying to disguise itself as a pennant. On the exhale, the boats moved. They didn't leap so much as decide that staying had been a mistake. Brynja's hands were exactly where invisible oars would have placed them, her shoulders set and released in the old conversation with resistance and give. Kettle crouched at the stern, a ballast made of intention. Noah whistled the rune back into place each time a crosswind grew curious. Ari struck the lyre once, then twice, not a shout pace but to suggest it, the difference between command and influence. The Jarl's craft skimmed like a hawk's shadow. It cut corners that didn't exist and made them into advantages. He rode sidewinds as if they had always been friends. He didn't so much pull as persuade. The heir loved him and wanted him pleased. Brynja took no shortcuts. She set stroke after honest stroke into the fabric of nothing, and the nothing consented to hold for her because she asked it to in the tone people use for stubborn animals they have fed. They passed a buttress of antler where icicles chimed in Dorian minor and tried to seduce the pace slower. Brynja didn't listen. Ari did, just briefly, because beauty is persuasive. He caught his own distraction and turned it into rhythm. "Left," he called softly, and the left learned its duty. The raven flew ahead, shouting proverbs like buoys. Don't turn where the wind is doing a favor. And treat a downdraft like a story. Let fall and then come under it. The Jarl smirked at that, which moved the gate just enough to let Brynja skim earlier than his calculation had allowed. Storm rooms open along the course. Pocket of air where weather liked to be alone. Entering one took speed the way confession takes bravado, and returns you quieter. Brynja sailed the edge of each, brushing its temper, without asking to change it. The Jarl plunged and came out faster, braided in lightning for a heartbeat. Hair haloed in plasma, like a saint for whom science had time. Noah touched 2 fingers to her tongue. Copper. She scrawled a protection against arrogance and blew it gently toward Brynja's back. It landed with no fuss. Brynja didn't know it was there, which is the best way for such protections to work. Half the fortress watched now. Flags, snow, old air with nothing better to do, antlers counting slow. The Finnish gates yawned and narrowed, as if practicing discretion. Ari could feel the shape of a path inside the race. Not drawn on the sky, but implied by consent, the way a public secret is kept because everyone has agreed not to say it out loud. He played the simplest pattern he knew. The rhythm fishermen fall into in a boat, and the tide forgive each other. The wind liked it. It rolled over on its back and showed its throat. The Jarl laughed, delighted and annoyed. He cut across the grain and stole a body length. Brynja answered not by stealing back, but by being heavier where it counted and lighter where it mattered. She moved like a woman who had always believed that fairness was a better lever than cleverness. "Now," Kettle said, and they did the thing crews do when the race is too close and the boat is too honest for tricks. They leaned together into the left, as if the left were a friend who needed proof. The air under them densified, a small miracle given freely to people who had asked for nothing else. The Jarl tried to steal that too, but this gift was mortal-sized. It did not fit him properly. He lost an, or that wasn't there. He lost an inch. The inch had friends. They came through the eyelets side by side, and then not. Brynja's prow, a suggestion of oak, arrived a shoulder first. The finish felt like a question mark becoming a period. The fortress slowed its rotation to witness with proper attention. The Jarl's craft slid long in the run-out, then became weather again without sulking. He turned to them with the air of a man who knows how to lose without becoming smaller. "You will keep your oar call," he told Brynja. "I will keep its echo for storms that need reminding of muscle." He lifted a hand, and the citadel bent its antlers toward the north, the way a stag points before it chooses to run. Cloud peeled back. Wind made a corridor and locked its elbows. Beyond the parting, the sky was darker, greener, the color of melted glass under ice. A thread of pressure lay across that color, like a seam waiting to be found by thumb. The path wasn't light. It was permission. "This will stay where I put it until you are done with it." The Jarl said, "Once only. If you come back for it, it will pretend not to know you. That is how favors keep their honor." He looked at Ari and tilted his head in the direction of some future day no one else could see. "A first line," he reminded gently, "not a threat, not a leash, just the maintenance of accounts." Ari bowed, not low. "Exactly, just enough to show he understood what it cost whether to remember a promise to a man." Brynja stood very still and let the moment belong to the wind. Then she recovered her voice and laid her claim on humility. "Thank you," she said. "We will borrow the shape and return what we can." The Jarl's mouth to the thin cliffs due at dusk, somewhere between smile and shadow, and he said nothing, which is how gods say you're welcome when they don't want to teach mortals the wrong habit. Noah gathered her invisible runes back into well-behaved possibility. Kettle rolled the light frame and stowed it with a sailor's tidy superstition. The raven, euphoric from proximity to event, preened and announced a no one. Proverb, raced the sky with clean pockets. No one argued. The fortress resumed its turning. The antlers clicked a benediction. The path lay open like a thought that had decided to be generous for an afternoon. They stepped onto it. It held the way truth holds when you finally stop trying to improve it. The wind did not push. It accompanied. Far ahead, the color changed again by a degree too small for names, which in their experience meant they were going the right way. Ari felt the almost syllable he'd been carrying shift on its shelf and settle, as if making room for company. Brynja flexed the muscles in her throat and listened to her oar call, sit down where it belonged, unspent, ready when bodies needed. Kettle looked back once at the fortress and did not see a jailer. He saw a courthouse of weather with an open door. Noah tasted the air and, finding no copper, smiled. The raven tucked its head and slept on the wind like a sentence that had earned its period. Brynja set the skiff into the sky the way she would ease a hull onto a slick river at thaw. 1 foot testing, one hand steady on the fort, her weight finding the honesty in the moving thing beneath. The aurora had divided itself into long, green streamers, each one a current of light with a grain you could feel if you remembered to listen with your shoulders. They weren't water, not wind, not quite silk. Something between, a river made of the patient agreement between cold and charge. The skiff took hold. The oar blades, nothing but air given shape by intent. Bit and released, and the craft slid along the luminous braid as if the night itself had combed a channel for her. Muscles lit one by one in her back and arms. Little furnaces coming to work. The burn arrived early and stayed. Not pain exactly. The bright ache that tells a body has been admitted to the old fraternity of effort. Kettle crouched low in the prow with the grace of a man who had learned to make himself into ballast and favor at once. Noah braced her feet against nothing that consented to be enough. Hands ready, sleeves hiding the lines of rune work that she preferred to keep shy until called. Ari sat sternward, lyre poised against his thigh, eyes searching the seam where streamers crossed and made dangerous eddies. The raven took the masthead like a black, impatient figurehead and craned forward, greedy for each new sentence the sky might say. The Jarl did not startle him with a charge. He arrived as storm logic does, assembling the corners, pulling threads until a squall had sleeves and then putting his arms into them. He came from their right, by courtesy first, a gust that tested cheeks and hair and sails that were only the willingness of cloth to remember their job. Then the chase, short, shouldered blasts that shoved at the oar blades, laughing. His fortress of antler and cloud spun somewhere behind and above, a courthouse that had stood to watch the contest with a single raised eyebrow of rhyme. He did not come alone. Squalls skirmished ahead of him in pairs, little twins with the same mean trick. Unlace the river of light, tangle it, turn current into skein. Keep the catch shallow, Brynja said through her teeth. These waters don't like show-offs. She shortened the stroke, and the skiff liked her for it, answering with a steadier slide, the nose not hunting as much. The streamers hissed under the keel with the sound oil makes when it is convinced to be water. Ari gave them a beat barely above a hum, so quiet might have been the idea of rhythm instead of rhythm itself. The aurora seemed to lean into it, as if even light enjoys a count. A squall shouldered in. The first hit took away a length of progress the way a lie takes away a morning, sudden, tidy. Brynja answered with angle instead of force, feathering the oar that would have fought, loading the other until the blades sang with the weight. The skiff slipped sideways past the meanness, graceful as a seal refusing a net. Another squall found them from the stern, tried to sit on the transom like unpaid rent. Kettle turned his shoulder into the shove, body as counter-argument. He did not grunt. He had promised himself to save noises for needs that mattered more. Ahead, the streamers nodded, 3 braids braided into something like a fisher's nightmare. The Jarl's laugh arrived as a pressure change. Proverb, the raven hissed, unable to help itself. Pick the knot that wants to be picked. Which one is that? Kettle asked without looking up. The one that holds you if you let it. Noah murmured, and then she did the opposite of pulling. She let her eyes soften until the tangle stopped being a tangle and became a story about history's crossing. With 2 fingers, she drew a small loop on the air at knee height. No rune yet, just an invitation for a future one, and pointed. There. Bryn just set the bow for that seam. The skiff tried to shy at the last breath. She talked to it the way she would to a child who had just realized streets have corners. I see it. You'll like it. Trust. The nose slipped into the weft. For 3 heartbeats, they were inside the cloth of the sky, green and white bands inches from cheek and shoulder, the air around them tasting of pennies and snowmelt, the hair on Ari's arms lifting with the nearness of too much grace. Then out, skimming the clean run beyond, the not past and already unremembering them. The Jarl did not fall behind. He changed tactics. He sent squalls like dogs on long leashes, then cut the leashes and let them teach themselves mischief. One gust took on a rope shaped by accident, a line thrown across their bow by the weather's own impatience. Mine, Kettle said, the unholy joy of usefulness in his voice, and reached. The Sikhs he had stolen. Balance a little wrong. Steel with a history of making bad arguments sound persuasive. Flashed once. It cut the rope the way a statement cuts a rumor. Clean. Then everything you thought you knew trying to find new posture. The severed wind snapped back, stung, and went looking for its mother. The loose end slapped Kettle's knuckles. He did not drop the knife. He had vows stored in his fingers now. They helped. Another, Noah said, and this time the Jarl obliged with intention, flinging 2 more ropes of wind to snarl the oar blades. Kettle took one. The stolen Sikh's bit complained, then bit true. The other snapped snake fast around his wrist. He could have yanked free and given skin to the sky. He did not. He held the rope and offered it to Noah like a partner offers a hand on a crowded floor. Knot it, he said. She did. Fingers working in old magic sailors know and names forget, the square knot that keeps a story from unspooling. It tied with a taste of copper on everyone's tongues. The rope of wind looked startled, then became a ring. Calm inside, tantrum outside. The skiff ran through it, and the tantrum kept running elsewhere. Brynja's burn was full now, shoulders protesting, hands gone to wood, back writing its own proverbs in heat. She pared the stroke down to a truth no one could argue with. The Jarl drew alongside on their quarter, eyes pleased with his own speed and the way weather is allowed. Taste my squalls, he called, charming as a dangerous marketplace. They're young and mean. Teach them manners, Brynja said, not raising her voice. She put in a 10-stroke the way a woman tells time with a knife, clean, exact, leaving no crumbs. Ari met her with the lyre, gave the oars a trough to drop into, then a crest to climb. He did not decorate. He set the table. The aurora altered its stitch, blue joining green, a rag of purple laying itself over both like a bruise that didn't belong to a body anymore. The sled light under them thickened. The Jarl sent a wall, a proper, disreputable wall of headwind stacked from nowhere to forever. It stopped them to the length of a breath, and threatened to stop them to the length of more. Kettle leaned out, so far the skiff argued. Let me fall, he said, cheerful as a criminal volunteering, and put his weight onto the wind. It took him, but only enough to make him into a kite. Brynja used his theft of drag, and pulled clean past the worst of it. Noah reached and collected Kettle with 3 knuckles to his belt and a small, disgusted laugh that meant don't show off where gods are watching. Proverb, the raven yelped, giddy, half to them, half to its ledger. Borrow gravity for what thinks it owns you. I am writing that down, Ari said, and did, mentally, because hands were busy. The Jarl tried a cross-blast meant to flip them like a bad coin. Noah saw it early. She tied a nothing knot in the air at shoulder height that taught the gust to hold its breath. It did on accident and forgot to commit. They came to the last reach, a straightaway of pale green that had the taste of exit. The finish would be where wind and light agreed to pretend there was a line. The Jarl ceded subtlety and came full on, shoulders of weather wide, a grin in the set of squalls. Brynja grinned back, an economy of teeth, and made the boat small. She shortened everything, catch, drive, recovery, even hope, until all that was left was the honest machine of body and intention working in front of witnesses. Ari held the rhythm. Kettle held the boat. Noah held the wind to its better nature. The raven held its breath. They were even, They were even with the Whisker's arrogance on the Jarl's side. Brynja gathered the last of her, the bit you never admit you have until you need to teach a season the manners of losing. She did not sprint. She did not panic. She allowed the stroke to become simple enough to be trusted by the light itself. The aurora under them tightened like a harp string tuned by a careful hand. The skiff leapt once, not by drama but by consent. Yes, all right, if you must. A heartbeat, the kind you feel in your gums before your chest remembers. They crossed. The line that was not a line remembered itself under their keel, and then forgot them, as good lines do. The Jarl arrived a breath later, laughing like hail that meant no harm, and still occasionally dented roofs. He lifted both hands, and weather everywhere in that room bowed an inch, which is as close as wind comes to applause. Brynja laid the oars down and sat very still until the shaking left her hands. Then she picked up her voice and put it back where it belonged. "We are done with racing," she said to the air and to the god inside it. "We are not done with owing." The Jarl's smile, tilted toward respect, edged in reluctance. "I keep my word," he said, and it annoyed him visibly to be the sort of being who did, which made the keeping sweeter. He gestured, and a seam opened ahead, not light but arrangement. A corridor where currents had been asked to remember their edges long enough for a mortal craft to pass. The path was narrow and short-lived and honest. "There," he said. "It will last for the time it takes to tell a truth to someone who deserves it." He looked at Kettle. "You carry a Seeks that thinks it owns the idea of cutting," he observed. "Teach it to be humble, or it will make you proud at the wrong time." Kettle, whose knuckles still buzzed from the rope of wind, dipped his head once. "I'll give a job that doesn't end in blood," he said. "It will hate it and learn." The Jarl turned to Noah. "You tie wind as if it were wool. Remember that knots fail when eyes are hungry." She accepted the rebuke and the compliment as twins. To Ari he said nothing, only raised 2 fingers away a clerk notes of future debt. Ari nodded in return. The first line he owed was being born in him like a frost flower he meant to read before he dared speak it. The raven, unable to keep ceremony from becoming inventory, announced, "Proverb, when clean, so losing has somewhere to sit." The Jarl almost smiled. "Keep that one," he said. "It will save you when no one is there to watch." They pushed the skiff into the offered seam. It held. The aurora behaved. The squalls sat down and licked their paws. Behind them, the fortress of Antler resumed its slow, judicial turn, satisfied to have been necessary again. Brynja rolled her shoulders and felt the good ache become instruction. Kettle looked at his knife and imagined cutting bread. Noah tucked an invisible cord behind her ear the way women do when hair and habit make cooperation. Ari played a single note that meant thank you without implying equality. The path closed gently behind them like a book not finished but faithfully marked. Ahead, the next trouble waited, listening for their arrival, which is to say, welcoming them in the only language that keeps heroes from becoming bores. The Jarl's path held like a thought refusing to scatter, a narrow corridor of steady current stitched across the sky. It carried them toward a high land that did not so much rise as decide not to fall. The fjell revealed itself slowly, first as a darker weight on a cloud, then as a wide shoulder of stone trimmed with glaciers that had chosen discipline over spectacle. Wind lowered its voice as they approached. Even the aurora, still faintly braided behind them, loosened into pale threads and let the night keep its dignity. They came ashore on a ledge of old snow that had learned the art of being floor. Above, the mountain wore a crown of frostwork shelves, terraces upon terraces like a library carved by breath. No script marked them, yet each ledge bore an alphabet of absence, slender ribs of hoarfrost holding the shape of what had not been said. When a breeze passed, the shelves sang very quietly, a choir of almosts. Brynja set the skiff's line around a horn of rock and listened. Kettle stood with his palms open, as if greeting a house where he hoped to be forgiven his muddy boots. Noah lifted her chin and tasted the air. Copper was absent. Snowmelt answered instead, clear and impartial. The raven hopped to the nearest shelf and reconsidered theft in a place where nothing wanted to be owned. This is where words go, Ari said, not to prove he knew, but to make room for knowing. The fjell did not contradict him. He felt the bead at his chest warm to a respectful simmer, as if recognizing a cousin. They climbed a path the mountain offered without being asked. Upon the first terrace lay unsent confessions, each held in frost as thin as onion skin. Apologies that had never found a night quiet enough. Truths rehearsed at wells and lost on the walk home. Names people wanted to speak and save until habit replaced courage. You could see the shape of them, small size given geometry. When Brinja breathed near, a few trembled. When Kettle passed, others leaned toward him as if old debts felt an animal consider making itself smaller. The next shelf held unplayed lullabies. Their notes slept in a drift so delicate, the least greed would crush it. A mother's humming that never crossed a room because her hands were too full. A father's tune that stayed in his throat because a day kept handing him tools and taking his time. A brother's nonsense song for a sister he hadn't admitted he loved. When the raven moved, the frost lullabies stirred like grass under bird feet and settled again. Ari almost reached, then didn't. Music this patient deserved to choose its own hour. Farther on, the shelves darkened with the soft weight of unmade apologies. These were heavier, rhyme layered upon rhyme, like snow that refused the avalanche because pride held it together. Their edges were clean, their centers were stubborn. Noah touched one with 2 fingers and pulled her hand back at once. "It wants a keep," she said. "Let it practice wanting something else, then." They moved up and around, carried by a spiral the mountain had place for pilgrims who admit uncertainty. Ari felt the spoon in his fist hum and then grow shy. Somewhere among these archives his own missing thing had fled, a second line that had lost its courage, a rhyme that had gone to sleep rather than fail publicly. He did not call to it. He unlearned calling. He let the shelves teach him their manners. Walk softly, leave warmth, do not tidy what the cold is guarding. He stopped when the air changed flavor, less snow, more old wood and clean linen. A ledge ahead shone finer than the rest. The frost there combed into a pattern that looked like a page you could bruise with too much attention. Beneath that hoarfrost lay his lost rhyme. He knew it the way you know a friend in a crowd, by the way their not looking feels like yours. It slept curled upon itself, a small architecture of syllables that had gone to ground when the world forgot mourning and rhymes began to snap in the cold. It was not grand. It was the sort of couplet that carries a pail and does not spill. He knelt and did not touch. Brinja stood a pace behind, guarding without standing sentry. Kettle turned his back to the wind as a wall. Noah unspooled silence, the kind that encourages a shy animal to step from brush. Ari lowered his mouth to the air above the frost. Not close enough to melt, close enough to persuade. He exhaled a kiss, not to rhyme itself but to the thin space between. His breath traveled over the hoarfrost and became a room. The ice did not protest. It moved aside politely, one crystal at a time, as if someone had reminded it that courtesy is a kind of strength. Beneath, the rhyme stirred. Its two halves found each other like hands waking. It turned once, as if checking that sleep had not stolen pieces, and then rose so lightly that even envy would have approved. He did not catch it. He let it hover and arrive at him of its own consent. Words formed behind his teeth with the humility of guests. The couplet came back as a simple hinge. Enough to hold, not enough to boast. He spoke it inwardly first, to see if his chest would accept the weight. It did, gladly, and made room. When he whispered aloud, the fjell did not echo question. It returned the sound as acknowledgement, the way a friend repeats your news to show it heard. Somewhere lower on the mountain, a shelf of lullabies sighed, a chord aligning very faintly with what he had said. The raven, moved despite itself, leaned close. Proverb, it offered gently. Wake, what is yours, as if it were borrowed. Ari smiled without permitting pride. Keep it, he said. Spend it only when we forget this place. The bird tucked the line away with unusual care, as if aware that even proverbs can chip if clacked too hard. They stayed a while and read without reading. Brinja found a cluster of confessions shaped like boat names and let her eyes bless them. Noah breathed on a cold apology until it admitted a corner of regret, then left it to grow the rest without supervision. Kettle knelt by an unsent confession that had his old master's posture. He did not smash it with satisfaction. He placed his palm an inch above and held it there until the frost adjusted, a small redecoration of terms. I will not carry you. I will not run. I will not forget. The path the Jarl had loaned them thinned. a reminder rather than a threat. It would hold for the work they had come to do, and that work was not possession. Ari stood and tested the rhyme in his mouth against other lines, the way a smith tests a fresh nail before trusting it to a beam. It held. He felt the almost syllable he had been carrying, the winter name that was not theirs, shift closer to comfort, as if pleased to sit near something honest. He would not set this rhyme like a trap. He would use it as bridge and leave a sign that said spare weight only. As they prepared to go, the Fjell offered a small, practical blessing. Frost lifted from certain shelves and let go of a handful of harmless details, the kind of village uses to rebuild ordinary days. A tune for folding linens, a phrase to say before stepping into cold water, a joke with no point that another room. These drifted around them like the breath of a bakery, getting ready before dawn. The bead at Ari's chest opened gladly and collected them, not as trophies, but as kindling. They descended the spiral without speaking, breath visible, pace matched, each with a portion of gentleness heavier than when they had come. At the ledge, the skiff waited, patient as an old dog. The corridor of steadied air still held, narrower, honest. Ari looked back once. The shelves glittered and minded their business. Somewhere up there, a lullaby turned over in its sleep and smiled without knowing why. They pushed off into the borrowed seam. The rhyme sat where it belonged, not at the front of his poem like a badge, but in its grain like good glue. Brynja glanced at him and knew by the set of his mouth that something had been returned. Noah touched the rail and felt the knot of the wind behave. Kettle breathed out and tasted snowmelt again. Clean, exact. The raven shut one eye and kept the other on the horizon, which had shifted by a shade too small to name. The same sign they'd learned to trust whenever the world made room for the next necessary word. They found it where the sky had folded itself into a quiet bowl. Snow fallen, so evenly it looked like thought cooling. Winter without a name waited there, not stalking, not sulking, simply present in the large way mountains are present when no one is looking at them. Vast, yes, patient, yes, childlike most of all. The cold around it was an attention rather than a weapon. Frost made lace on the air itself, patterns forming and erasing like a shy hand practicing letters in flower. It noticed them with delight unsharpened by pride, the way a child notices new boots at the door. The light dimmed and then brightened as if winter had remembered dimming was polite, and then remembered brightness was also. Stories, it breathed. Each syllable exhaled across the valley like a slow ribbon. I want stories. I will try them on. The voice was not quite words, more the pressure words leave on a world when words are away. Snowflakes rose, hung, listened, and resettled. Ari stepped forward with the care of a guest, placing a bowl on a table that has held grief. The amber at his chest warmed. The beads hummed softening the edges of the cold, as if to say, "We brought manners." "We can tell you stories," he said, and winter's vastness leaned closer, a cathedral bending to hear a riddle. "In each," Winter added hopefully, "I will have a name. Names are cloaks. If one fits, I will keep it." Brynja and Kettle and Noah stood like different kind of steadiness, or ballast, pattern. The raven perched on Ari's shoulder with unusual restraint, as if sound could scuff a floor. "Begin," Winter breathed, and the snow took the word and folded it into its own brightness. Ari told a small tale first, the way you offer a spoonful before the bowl. A farm on a south slope, a family counting the jars, a coal that arrived with clear purpose. "We called you Hearthkeeper that year," he said, "because you taught us to draw close." Winter brightened, pleased to be given a job instead of a leash. Hearthkeeper. It repeated, and the name went through the valley like a careful broom. The broom swept too clean. Beyond the bowl, Frost stiffened in corridors not meant for it. Sap retreated so far into trunks it forgot the way out. In home-raised sister fields, sprouts that had dared the light previously now bowed at the new etiquette and did not rise again. The name kept the hearth, and kept the warmth from wandering where it was owed. Noah tasted copper and shook her head. "Too tight," she whispered. The winter without a name dimmed apologetically, as if a borrowed sweater had shrunk in the wash. "Again?" it asked. Ari chose a story of sailors then, to loosen what had drawn too snug. Nets steaming on the snow, a cove where ice left a corridor like a favor, a season that let men be exact. We called you Channel Minder, he offered, because you made a road in difficult water. Winter's edges lifted, pleased to be associated with mercy that had a map. Channel Minder, it breathed, and the air rearranged its tutors. The channels became law. The road stayed where it was put even when weather asked to teach a different lesson. Fishermen, certain of the path, steer by prediction, not looking, and met each other the blind bend of God had not meant to exist. Two holes understood each other too late. Oars, good men, went quiet. The name had laid a rope and pulled accents along it. Brynja winced, palms open. Too sure, she said. Winter looked genuinely sorry, as only a large thing can when it learns it has broken a delicate one. Again, it asked smaller. The raven ruffled in sympathy and kept its proverb to itself. Ari tried a name that was more blessing than blueprint. He told a child snow, the kind that comes on a morning when school forgets itself and the world forgives footprints that wander. Play weather, he said gently, and winter brightened with a softness that made even Kettle smile. Play weather. It sang to itself, and the valley obliged. Roofs wore white hats. Fences softened. The air found its giggle. Play multiplied. In barns and boat sheds and storerooms, work remembered fun and forgot purpose. Ropes left coiled themselves into cat's cradle. Sleds tempted men who should have been repairing nets. Loaves rose and rose and rose until the dough could not remember bread. When the name wandered into fields still nursing a second chance of harvest, it taught barley to reenact childhood, and the heads bent to play on the ground. Crops withered, not from cold, but from too much joy in the wrong place. Names pull, Noah murmured. They always pull. Ari tried a sternness, then, hoping to counterweight delight. Measure keeper, he offered. In a story where winter wrote rules into ice, so no one fell through, where cold meant yes here and no there. Winter repeated it dutifully. Order arrived, but with it came the kind of prediction that makes cowards brave and brave men careless. Fishermen set clocks by frost lines that lied politely. A boy walked out on a pond that had kept its promise until it didn't. There is an arithmetic to naming. Every certainty paid for inattentions no one thinks to pay. They paused. Breath made little houses in the air, and the houses drifted away. Homeless. Brynja spoke without looking at the god. What if the name is not a title? She was thinking in verbs again. What if it is a way to ask? The winter without a name listened the way a child listens to a story that might have a surprise. Ari tried a petition. Guessed, he offered softly, and told a tale where winter came at dusk, knocked with cold on lintels, and was let in to sit beside water kept boiling for tea. Guests warmed the valley, not by warming it, but by teaching welcome. The valley warmed back. Too much. In towns beyond Homri, men opened barns wide and winter entered, polite, and crops stored their learned humility badly. Mold grew like gossip. Too hospitable, Brynja said ruefully. Winter's patience did not thin. It was that kind of patience that has never yet met the last straw. Again, it asked. Kettle, who knew the price of being named by men who didn't love you, said nothing and adjusted his belt as if to accommodate some weight that was not yet his. Ari spoke, keeper of edges, and told a story of cliffs that did not crumble, of ice that taught lakes their borders. Then harbors silted where they shouldn't. Ice sat too firmly, trapping seal breath into tight routines predators could memorize. He tried listener bones, a tale of old people who didn't hurt when snow spoke gently. Joints ease, yes, but spines forgot the alarm that saves a body from a fall. Sleep quiet, he offered, and in homes where grief needed tears to wash rooms, the name muffled the weeping and left sorrow to thicken, unvented. Each name pulled a kindness, so hard it dragged wrongness behind it. Noah made a knot in the air and undid it again. We are naming functions, she said. Winter is asking for story, not job. The raven, at last unable to keep its mouth, whispered. Proverb, the coat that fits too well forgets bodies change. Winter looked down at its vastness like a child caught wearing a parent's boots. Again, it asked softer now, as if the bowl of sky might spill. Ari changed the game. He told a story of two brothers who had stopped speaking and the season that sat between them long enough for silence to become soil. In spring, words came up like volunteer herbs. He did not say winter's name. He opened a space for it. When the tale ended, he breathed a syllable that was barely a syllable, a hinge of sound that asked rather than fixed. The valley did not buckle. The air did not break. Crops neither withered nor bloated on attention. Fishermen felt a hand on their shoulders at the moment's prediction most tempts. The hand was not a stop. It was a question. Winter leaned forward, delighted. "Is that my name?" Ari did not answer. He could feel how easily a scent could make a leash. "It could be," he said, honest as weather. "It could also be a door." Winter tried the door. For a handful of breast a bowl of sky held grace the way a palm holds water. Not to keep, but to learn the shape. Then the shape ran out between fingers. "I like stories," Winter confessed, almost ashamed. "Names hurt when they are too good." Brynja stepped close until the cold made a ring around her, as if not to scuff boots on skirts. "We will keep telling," she said. "You will keep trying them on. We will not ask you to keep any, only to learn which ones we cannot afford." Kettle nodded once, sentencing himself to a labor he could love. Noah touched 2 fingers to her tongue and found no copper, only snow, only breath. "We will braid a name from refusals," she said. Something wide enough to loosen and small enough not to be a law. They told again and again, stories of barns that opened only as far as gratitude, of ice that cracked loudly on purpose when men lied to themselves about thickness, of schools that closed not because it snowed, but because a mother needed help. At each end, Ari breathed the possible, and Winter wore for the length of a heartbeat. Some possibilities withered grain. Some taught fishermen to trust prophecy over horizon. These they discarded like cloaks that looked fine and pinched the shoulder. Others did nothing, which is a kind of mercy and not a name. At last, when their voices were hoarse and the beat at Ari's chest hummed like a sleeping hive, Winter settled down in the bowl of the valley and put its head on its folded arms, monumental and suddenly very young. "More tomorrow," it murmured without calendar, pleased in a way only children and weather can be pleased by unfinished things. The sky exhaled. The frost on the air spelled nothing and meant welcome. They had not found the name. They had learned the danger of finding it too well. And Winter, unnamed still, had learned to ask. Pressed past easy lies, Kettle lets the deeper truth out like a blade he's tired of hiding. He tells how, on the night the raiders burned the sister village, he slipped into a smoke-sweet hut and stole the naming, the bowl of water with its ash, the coal for the rune on the brow, the clean cloth that should have caught the first word. He left only silence and a door closing. The child woke without a name, and the world, obedient beast that it is, learned a little how to go on without one. At this, Winter without a name lifts its vast head, recognizing the shape of itself in the wound. The cold deepens until frost writes nothing at all. Winds thicken around Kettle like kin. Brynja's knuckles pale on the oar's ghost. Noah steps back as if from a cliff that speaks. Ari feels a high breath falter, a crack in the shared chest. The raven goes solemn and quiet. Kettle offers his seeks and his wrists. Winter swells, whispering brother. The fellowship fractures, justice pulling one way, the quest the other, and the path between them narrows to a blade. Noah traces a circle in the air with a copper-bitten finger and summons the myth wolf, the one that eats remorse and spits out courage in cold embers. It rises from the ice like smoke with spine, eyes slit where night lives, and scents Kettle without hatred, only hungry for what weighs him down. "Give me what binds you." It growls without sound. Kettle kneels, opens his hands, and feeds the beast's shame, the memory of the wordless cradle, the closing door, the silence that taught the world to go on without a name. The wolf chews slowly, jaws working like moon mills, and each gulp stills a tremor. When it's done, it tilts its head and exhales courage in a rough breath that smells of pine and sea. "The responsibility stays with you," says Noah, and Kettle nods, lighter and graver. Then the wolf wags its shadow tail, wrenches out a tooth, and drops it on the ice. Noah sets the tooth into a hilt of bone and fiber. The blade is born pale, stubbornly clean, a knife that separates lies from truth, without wounding the flesh that bears them. Brynja holds her breath as if tying a knot in her own chest and dives to the crack in the black ice. The water is needle and salt. The world narrows to distant creeks, and the lost gleam below, trapped in the crust like an amber insect in a glass of ages. She swims in short strokes, numb fingers feeling for fissures, until she finds a capsule, an egg of very ancient brightness, pale yellow with dawn's veining. She pries it loose with midwife's care, and the ice groans like an old door. She returns, shouldering the night, and bursts through the surface in a tearing rush of breath. She emerges blue-lipped, eyes laughing, and bears in cupped hands the fragile light. Warmth not yet brave enough, vague as a promise of an oven newly lit. Ari brings the amber amphor closer to cradle it. Noah holds out a dry cloth. Kettle offers silence. The raven, puffed with solemnity, bows and swears, very politely, with rooftop etiquette, that it never, under any circumstances, intended to eat the sunrise. Ari understands it as if an old door, forgotten to back of the house, yielded with a clean snap. The scene returns whole, not as memory but as a lit room. His sister with hair pasted by sweat, the makeshift cradle beside the stove, the bowl with water, and Ash waiting for the word, the coals set upright like a small totem, and then the shout from outside, the hurry, the with drinking fire, the smoke invading the syllables before they had bodies. What remained wasn't silence. It was an open mouth without a name. The newborn died inside that interval, without a title by which to be called back in dreams. The stolen night he sees now was his own house's, his sister's child's right. Kettle had taken the gesture and left the whole, and the whole had learned to multiply. The understanding doesn't strike. It tides. Ari feels the weight shift his ribs. His knees want to fold, his throat asking for water. The amber on his chest warms in solidarity. The raven, who knows when things change density, draws in its neck and goes still. Brynja loosens a hand that was still holding an imaginary oar. Noah watches the world seem as one who reads stitching from the inside. And winter without a name, vast and attentive, inclines its head. It recognizes a kinship between a child without a word and a season without baptism. Then Ari sees the spell's mechanism, the hidden hinge. A world does not forgive what it refuses to remember. So long as her sister's cradle is only smoke and memory, so long as the stolen right remains without a story, the season will stay orphaned, and orphaned it will spread over every hour like ash covering seed. Forgiveness requires record, witness, a word willing to bear weight. Without that, guilt keeps salt in the barrel. He decides, not with bravado, but with the quiet of someone who has set the foundation stones. He will name both absences in the same breath, the child and the season, bring the little girl into the world one last time, not to bind her, but to give her ground on which to lie. And winter, called to a shape that consents to leave when its hour is done. One word for each and one for both. He thinks, knowing that true names are crossable, they need air, the space between mouth and thing. He gathers crumbs of right, invents what was missing without lying. The bowl of water will be the gleam and the egg of brightness Brynja saved. The ash will be the sweet dust of amber. The coal, the point of the now obedient seeks. The cloth, the silence Kettle offers on his knees. Noah marks a discreet circle in the air, so the remembrance won't spill. Brynja takes the wind by the collar, so it won't interrupt. The raven learns to reverence roofs owe at funerals. Ari inhales slowly, until he feels the group's breathing choose the same cadence. He understands he must speak as one who gives back, not demands, not captures. First, he will say the name his sister never got to give, a simple name of bread and stone, so the child may find a place among the called. Then, in the same breath, he will pronounce a form of winter that is neither shackle nor invitation to disaster, a name that is a question, a passage, a promise of departure. 2 baptisms in one gesture, to stitch cradle and season, memory and weather, guilt and continuation. And when the word arrives, if it arrives, he will loose it over both, not to fix them, but so that the world, remembering, can at last forgive. In Holmree Square the frost has written a clean page. Doors open and figures step out carrying the tools that have always explained them. Nets mended and held for no reason. A bell rope coiled like a sleeping question. Bread boards pale with the memory of flour. The sky above is still the thoughtful blue that refuses to pick a side, but along the eaves a thin verge of brightness waits, undecided. Children stand hip to hip with elders, as if height were a superstition. No one speaks first. The square has learned to begin people when it's ready. Noah walks a slow circle, and the air remembers her. She lifts one hand and pinches two fingers together as if pulling a hair from milk. When she draws them apart, a faint line shines between them, a filament made of breath and attention. She dips it into a neighbor's mouth, then into another's, tying a quick, domestic knot that leaves neither person feeling owned. Voices of loose ends, she says without saying aloud. We'll lace them. House by house, throat by throat, she links sound to sound. Brinja's orcal folded low under an old lullaby that a grandmother hums without remembering her own lips. Kettle's new gravity threaded through a boy's nervous laugh. The baker's blessing for dough. Be patient, be brave. Laid as a weft under everything. When she is done, the line of voice is a single chord that hums at hip height around the square, not binding but reminding. The hum tastes faintly of metal the way a cold spoon does on the tongue. Order, not command. The dead attend like pale guests who have come properly dressed for weather they no longer need. They stand near doorways for courtesy's sake, and drift nearer as the living make room. Their faces are quieter than portraits. Their hands keep the posture of tasks they will resume if anyone asked. A girl whose braid never learned to gray holds a handle of an invisible bucket. A fisherman's scarf remembers the rope that made it. Ari's mother listens with the same bowl-shaped attention she used to give to storms and stories, her eyes full of warmth she can't carry any more except as gaze. The dead do not cast cold. They bring an emptiness that leaves space for the living to stand taller. Ari steps into the center, as if it were a boat. In one hand he holds a dawn, no heavier than an egg and just as undecided. The salvage lights its cup, a pale yolk with veins of yellow, thinking about gold. It warms nothing yet. It is promise, not fire. In his other hand is a knife set with the wolf's tooth, its pale edge refusing to shine because it prefers the work to the attention. Between his palms, beginning in discernment, both fragile if dropped. The raven lands on a bell beam and bows like a magistrate who has practiced humility for special occasions. Proverb. It announces in a voice it polished beforehand. Begin where breath agrees. Then it falls silent, and, for once, let silence be the ornament. Ari breathes once, twice, until the village chord catches his cadence and returns it, making a bowl of sound in which words might be safe to stand. He raises the wolf-tooth knife, not high, and passes its edge through the air above the square. It meets nothing, yet the nothing parts along a hairline. On one side lie fear thoughts, on the other, the things fear had borrowed and now returns. Lies slew off like hoarfrost, brittle and unresentful. We are not naming to own. Ari says, voice plain as water. We are remembering to forgive. He lowers the blade and lifts the dawn. The fragile light answers his pulse with one of its own, a small yes tapped with the etiquette of birds. He looks toward the door where his sister once lived and knows, without needing proof, that the room she made out of labor and humor, and skull will open just enough for this moment to fit. A child, he says, and it is not a performance. It is a household inventory, true and brief. A little girl who had a place for her name and was denied the hour to wear it. Noah draws a circle in the air around his words the way a midwife draws privacy around a bed in a crowded house. Brinja stands at the square's edge and keeps the wind from laughing at the wrong time. Kettle kneels because some debts are best looked at from lower down. The dead lean forward. The living lean with them. Ari tilts the dawn and lets a narrow thread of brightness spill into the bowl of his voice. I call you Jah, he says. Simple, a syllable you would fold into any day. The sound is bread-sized, not grand. It wears no jewelry. The square holds. Something eases. First in the rafters, then in knees, finally in the tiny responsible muscles that gather between the eyes when grief is doing its chores. In the doorway of the old house, nothing appears, and yet 3 people feel their hands grow suddenly heavier with the remembered weight of a baby settled there a heartbeat. Ari's mother smiles with her whole face and wastes none of it on pride. A raven feather drifts down and lands on the sill like a period that means keep going. Ari does not stop. He keeps the dawn raised and turns his shoulders slightly toward the east that the village has refused to presume. And the season, He says, that forgot how to leave because we forgot how to greet it by its right work. We have called it suffering, trial, test. We have called it luck when it broke its promise and let us steal days. We will not bribe or leash it now. We will give it a way to go. He does not choose a title. He tells a small story instead. The one winter like without damage. Two brothers, a long silence, snow sitting between them until the silence loosened to soil that took seed. He doesn't say the name inside the story. He turns the tale into a doorway and waits. The knife is still in his hand. He passes its edge once more through the air and feels nothing but the satisfaction of something aligning. Then, with the same breath that ended the girl's naming, he lets a syllable out that is barely a syllable, a curving sound that asks rather than pins. It is not a coat. It is a threshold. The square receives it. The dead do not flinch. A dog raises its head, but does not bark. Frost along the doorframes writes a sentence that leaves the last word open. The way good teachers leave chalk poised. The light in Ari's palm brightens by the tiniest courage. Enough to warm the place where hands meet, not enough to lie about weather. Above the roofs, the blue that has been so stubborn thinks about another color and, undecided, becomes generous. Kettle rises. He does not ask for absolution. He offers the work he has given himself. Water carried fuller, ropes cut only from wind. The knife in Ari's hand does not thirst. It is satisfied if shaved lies away from truth without tasting blood. Noah breathes, and the cord of voices cinches once in approval, then relaxes. A belt refit to a body that has changed size. Brynja lets go of the wind's collar, and it walks, suddenly polite, among the gathered. In the line where east pretends to begin, a fur on the headland draws a thinner shadow. The bell, stubborn servant, finds a single note and keeps it to itself like a pocket-warm coin. Ari lowers the dawn into the amber vessel. It nests there like an egg returned to a wiser nest, not to be brooded into scandal, but to be kept from mending. He sets the wolf-tooth knife point down in the square, and Frost climbs its spine a finger's height and stops, as if wanting to learn restraint. The raven clears its throat with ceremony. Proverb. It says softly, almost the beam it stands on, name the wound so the skin can close, and name the season so the door can open. No one laughs. No one needs to. The square, having done what squares were invented to do, exhales. Somewhere out on the water, a floe turns over in its sleep and sinks a handspan lower, choosing patience. The dead step back to doorways that will remember them longer now. The living find their feet have learned a new balance, one that can carry both cradle and weather without lying about either. Ari looks up at the sky. He cannot command and does not try. He listens, because listening is the only proof a word belongs where it was placed. The blue listens back. Between them, something like mourning, a small, persistent permission, begins to happen, unannounced, in exactly the right size. Ari lifts the wolf-tooth knife and measures the square with his breath. The hush is not absence. It is material waiting to be shaped. He draws the blade through it the way a careful hand opens a seam in good cloth. No flourish, no appetite, just a clean persuasion of edge against tension. Sound parts along a narrow line. The air does not bleed. It folds back, consenting, and a door appears where there had only been the habit of quiet. Its frame is nothing you can touch, yet everyone can see it. A pale, vertical ripple, the height of a man, and a little more, with room for a memory to pass through without ducking. He does not enter. He stands at the lintel he has made and speaks into the room beyond. The dead lean closer. The living do the courtesy of stillness. Even roofs practice listening. With his left hand, he holds Dawn close to the threshold so light, can learn the shape of passage. With his right, he rests the knife's spine against his palm to remind the edge it is not needed for harm today. He says the child's name first, because beginnings should be simple. Ojah, he breathes, and the syllable sets like a small stone in a shallow river, making the water show its movement honestly. Nothing miraculous happens, which is how good miracles behave. 3 women who never met his sister feel their arms ache, as if from a weight once lifted. A boy hears his own mother hum a tune with no words and understands what the missing word had been trying to be. In a doorway, Ari's mother smiles with a patience that outlived weather. The door in the hush holds. It is wider now, not because Ari widened it, but because the name he placed within it chose to sit down and make room. He waits for the quiet to settle again, the way a baker waits for dough to remember itself after a touch. Then he turns his mouth slightly toward the great listening presence that has taken to measure the square without casting a shadow. Winter is near, vast, patient, childlike. Its attention cool as clean linen. Ari does not draw himself up. He does not preach. He tells a short truth. We have offered you names that were tools or fences. He says, they pinched. They pulled. We learned. If a name is a house, may this one have windows. He lets a breath cross the threshold, and on that breath, he places the word the village has earned the right to say. Helder, he offers, careful with the vowel as if it were an egg. The holder. The syllables do not snag. They don't command, they settle. Helder arrives in the square like a bowl set on a table. Workmanlike, hospitable, ready to be filled and emptied without complaint. It doesn't promise warmth. It promises shape. Rhyme gathers along doorframes and refuses to harden into law. A draft tests a word and decides to behave. Far off, a flow that had been angling toward mischief chooses, unimaginably, to wait. Winter tries the name on, not as a cuirass or a leash, but as a room. It moves inside the word and discovers corners where resting is not failure. It finds a threshold it can stand in without being demanded to either come or go. And because it is childlike still, it laughs. Quietly, a soft exhalation that leaves fern patterns on the nearest pane. Holder. It repeats to itself, not proudly but with relief, the way a traveler repeats the address of a place that will take them in if the hour is wrong. The air changes fractionally. People breathe as one without being told. Noah's chord of voice hums a tone lower and then another, until the note sits in everyone's ribs like a tool hung on its proper nail. Brynja lets her hand fall from the wind's collar. The wind sits. Kettle looks at his knife hand and sees that it is empty, and for the first time since he was a boy, the emptiness does not accuse him. The raven hops once and, knowing ceremony when it sees it, restricts itself to a whisper. Proverb. Build a room before you invite the weather. No one shushes it. The adage lands and behaves. Winter learns quickly. It tests held at the edges. When a mother thinks of a path to the storehouse, the name holds a corridor of clean coal between drifts and nothing else. When a fisherman checks his rope, the name keeps the knot honest without turning it to iron. When grief approaches a door with muddy boots, the name offers a mat and does not ask it to leave. Nothing is forced. The season's muscle discovers that restraint can be a strength more pleasurable than conquer. Ari lowers the dawn to the door. He cut and lets a slender thread of light run along the jamb. It pools there with the patience of sap in a good spring. Helder does not hoard it. The light stays where it was asked to stay and refuses, politely, to make anyone brave beyond their hour. It is enough to warm the skin between two joined hands. A small dog, taken by curiosity, slips through the door and back again and shakes once, as if to agree. The wolf-toothed knife remains upright in the snow at Ari's feet, its edge quiet, its point teaching Frost how to stop. He places his palm over the pommel. Your work is to separate pretense from promise, he tells it, as if speaking to a stubborn apprentice. You will not be asked to taste blood. The knife, being a tool and not a man, obeys. Its shadow becomes a straight sentence that ends nowhere dramatic. Helder breathes. The square breathes with it. The dead lean back to their thresholds, satisfied in the thrifty way of people who like to see things put to their best use. The living discover that standing is easier when the air agrees to hold some of the weight. Above the roofs, the thoughtful blue admits a softer shade along its seam. Not mourning, permission. The door in the hush remains, not as a whole, but as a promise kept. Anyone may speak through it the names the world needs to remember in order to forgive. Ari steps away from the cut without closing it. A good door should learn to mind itself. He lifts the amber vessel, and the not yet dawn within answers with a steadier pulse, as if relieved to have a frame to practice inside. Winter, Helder now when invited, settles into its work. It will hold the coal where it helps and release it where it harms, not because a law says so, but because a home prefers harmony. Only then does Ari look upward. He does not expect revelation. He listens to the way the name he offered echoes, not outward to the edges of the world, but inward, to the places where a village keeps itself. The echo is soft and useful. It sounds like drawers closing, boots scraped clean, a bell rehearsing its tone before it dares ring. Names, he thinks, can be prisons when they brag. Today a name became a house. And in a house, at last, even winter knows where to hang its coat. Light returns the way a good neighbor does, knocking once, then letting you see its shadow under the door before it steps in with its hat in its hands. It does not blow the hinges off the season held or holds. It consults, checks the frame, and waits for the latch to be lifted from within. A pale seam along the eastern boards widens to the width of a fingertip. Frost reads a new sentence and adds a courteous comma. Roofs shrug. A few crystals leap off like children dismissed from chores. The sun stretches from its long crouch, peers over the rim of the world as though checking a ledger, and, according to the Raven, who claims exclusive translation rights, says, "Right, back to work." It comes not as a conqueror with banners, but as a craftsperson rolling up sleeves. Where it touches, it measures first, warms second. Helder stands in the doorway and nods, a householder letting a guest pass with a reminder glance toward the carpet. The guest understands. Shadows round their corners and stop being laws. The bell rope tries a note and keeps it, just one, a pocketed coin against later needs. In lanes between racks and boats, snow loosens a fraction, becoming a thing that remembers water instead of a punishment that remembers nothing. The old sled runners whisper apologies to the ground. A dog finds a patch of sun that fits its rib cage and becomes a soft, slow machine for happiness. Rivers do what waking things do. They blink. First a glassy eyelid slides, then a delicate fracture draws a silver hair through the pupil. Then the lid lifts and the eye looks back. Under the ice, fish consult their maps. Up at the edges, water practices its name in 3 tenses. Was, will be, is, and decides as feels best in the mouth today. With a small, delighted argument, it reintroduces itself to stone. Language warms last and best. Words shed their stiff coats. Vowels, which had huddled like geese, get up and walk around. Consonants hang their blades on pegs, and remember they were always meant to be beams and braces. Phrases that had been stacked like firewood become bridges again. The rhyme Ari rescued turns its face toward east as a habit rather than a duty, and lays its clean little hinge into the poem so snugly that the line after relaxes. In kitchens, idioms that winter kept tight in jars are opened and passed with bread. The jar lids ping like polite bells. The dead attend mourning like a well-rehearsed chorus fading behind the stage. They keep to the threshold shadows, nodding at each sound that proves the living had not squandered the night. When the bell gives its second note, brazen only in the sense that brass is honest, the pale guests step back an inch. A third note, and they cross their arms, satisfied in precise thrift of their approval. They do not disappear. They tidy themselves away. Brynja stands in the square with her shoulders at ease for the first time in a long count of knot days. She sets a bucket where sun and shade make a treaty, and watches how water learns a causeway between them. "It'll do," she says, which in her mouth is praise with a backbone. She turns toward the racks and loosens knots one notch, trusting the air to dry and not to steal. Her oar call stays in its throat shelf, ready but unspent. When wind slips by, it sits up, is recognized, and settles like a dog that has finally learned the house rules. Kettle walks the shore and does not search the horizon for punishment. He unrolls rope, counts with the gravity of a man who has decided to be accountable for the arithmetic, and finds each length honest. He draws a wolf-tooth knife and cuts nothing living, trims a fray from a net, frees a snagged idea from a boy's explanation, separates excuse from reason, and leaves both useful. When he's done, he rinses the blade in meltwater. The frost along its edge melts to the exact line, then stops, as if impressed by a principle it can respect. Noah harvests her knots. She gathers a cord of voices she lays around the square and tucks it not away but through. Under a lintel, around a bell pull, across the lip of a well. So the village keeps finding it where it needs reminding. She writes 3 small runes in the warm damp on a south-facing sill. They look like nothing until the sun glances them, and they flash once, modest as a good idea. Satisfied, she blows on her fingers and tastes no copper, only iron yeast and a clean saw to work. Ari does not announce a poem. He goes to the door he cut in a hush and checks its jamb with a carpenter's thumb. It holds, a threshold the villagers learn to use without ceremony. He plants the amber vessel on the sill and tips the rescued Dawn into the room, like a careful host watering a plant he has finally placed in the right window. The light doesn't leap, it studies. It expands a palm. It chooses a corner and tries on the shape of it. He speaks Sulja's name once, not outward into the square, but inward to the place that keeps names in case someone needs to be called. The house receives it like a drawer lined with fabric. Held, hearing that usage, smiles in the weatherway by allowing Cloud to learn how to be thin, without leaving. The raven makes a circuit over the roofs, a black punctuation mark checking sentences. From time to time it misquotes the sun. Back to work, back to work. Not to claim authority, but to practice saying the exact amount of joy permitted by dignity. It steals a line of steam from the bakery and returns it, slightly rearranged as a proverb. Rise when you are ready. Rise because you are ready. No one mocks it. Someone laughs. The laugh sticks to the square like sugar and does not invite ants. Beyond the headland, ice floes change their minds with grace. One turns and becomes a dock for 3 gulls arguing about nothing. Another bumps a third, apologizes in the language of soft knocks, and drifts a little south to give the channel back the shape it prefers. Helda holds the coal where fish need it, where grain asks for it, where craft requires steadiness, and releases it from doorframes and lungs. The season is not shorter, it is better aimed. Song arrives as if it had been waiting behind the bell rope for instructions. At first it comes from habit, the work song for beating dust out of rug, the boat song for the oar that sticks at the same place every year, the child's off-key hymn to an invented Saint of Cats. Then language, thawed and limber, begins to risk harmony. A grandmother takes a phrase out of her apron pocket and adds it to the child's tune. The baker finds a middle and folds it in. Kettle keeps time by not hurrying. Brinja, who never sings when pulling, hums when coiling rope and pretends she doesn't. The song is not about victory. It is about how things fit. At the cliff, the oak that leans inland coughs a leaf bud into consideration. It is too early to swear to it. It is exactly the right hour to imagine it. The tide tests its old argument with the stones and thinks better of raising its voice. Down the path, a goat practicing the ethics of head butting tries to quarrel with a sack of barley and is outvoted by light. Even the church, which has been patient with Miss Button's psalms, lets one correct note out through a crack, hears a fine purchase, and gives it a thin friend. Toward evening, an actual evening measured, unshowy, the blue deepens without threat. Helder stands at the edge of the square and lays a cool hand across the brow of the day. The sun bows, grateful to have been a colleague instead of a conqueror. Someone lights a lamp not to defy the dark, but to invite it in and seat it where conversation won't stumble. Laughter returns to its original size. Tears, when they come, do their job and dry without salt rings. Ari sits on the step with the door, he cut behind him, and the amber vessel within reach. He writes a line, then a blank, then another line that chooses the blank as its friend. He doesn't chase metaphors. He lets work sing through words until words are honest enough to carry work. He looks up. The square is itself again, and somewhat more so, a place that knows the weight of names and the generosity of thresholds. The raven, bored with virtue, steals a crumb and is forgiven in advance. Helder breathes, and the village breathes with it, and the sun, back on the job, slides its toolbox under the horizon, winks, and clocks out with the satisfaction of a day in which nothing dramatic was required to be good. Language, not sated but content, puts its instruments away with care, knowing tomorrow will want them, in song, barefoot, shy, delighted, finds its bed and sleeps. Brinja returns to the sheds that smell of tar and thawed rope and small, square faith. Her hands, always competent, have learned a steadier grammar. Pressure where the plank begs it, patience where the seam needs to remember, a pause before every final drive of the peg, so the wood can agree. She sands until the grain speaks in low vowels, then oils, then waits, a craftsperson who has stopped mistaking hurry for love. When the boats are flipped, Their bellies are a geography of men's, not hidden, not proud, lines like heel cuts that know the difference between scar and brag. She starts marking each repair with a thread of color flax. No code at first, only beauty. Later, children learn the colors and can read the boats like weather. Green for a fix made with laughter, blue for patience, red for a day when wind tried to teach the wrong lesson and was corrected. She retires tricks that depended on luck. She keeps only what can be taught. When storms test a harbor, Brinja walks the piers with a pencil and a string and leaves little instructions tucked under cleats. 2 turns and honesty. Let this not breathe. Wood remembers. Ask nicely. Sailcloth learns her square stitch and stops sulking. The old boat with a smile-shaped scar becomes a schoolmaster. She lets apprentices make their first mistakes on it, because it forgives and keeps no book. At night, when the sheds belong to mice, she sits on the threshold and hums not to the wind, but to the habit of wind, and the habit remembers to behave. Kettle, who once carried fire for a man he does not name, becomes the keeper of naming nights. He mends a hut no one was using, sets a table with the stubborn dignity of a penitent turned steward, and gathers the things a name asks for. Clear water, a shard of clean coal, a pane of dark glass to show a face to itself before it hears its word, cloth for drying tears that may or may not come. He writes nothing down that would make ceremony into law. He tells the parents what the raven told him, though kinder, a name is a door. Pick one you'll keep oiled. News travels. From rock farms and sea-wed towns, people come by sled and foot, sometimes late, sometimes with the weather's excuse. Kettle received them all, even the mother who swore she wouldn't, even the father who pretends names are for bookkeeping. He keeps foxes out, worries in, and shame at the threshold, where it can be reclaimed in small, useful pieces. When the hour tilts, he opens the room the way Ari cut the hush. Not with force, with precision. The child's brow meets coal. The water makes a sound like consent in a bowl. The word arrives. Sometimes from the mother's mouth, sometimes from the father's, sometimes from an aunt or a cousin or a trembling neighbor who has been talking to the baby in her head for weeks. Kettle listens, not for correctness, but for fit. If the name lies, he lets silence contradict it. If truth arrives shy, he lends it his breath. He is not priest. He is hinge. He keeps a small wooden box in the corner for endings. A strand of hair when an old name has to be retired with grief and gratitude. A pebble from the path where a child learned to walk without looking down. A note from a man who misused a word for years and has finally taught it manners. In time, the box becomes a garden of proofs that names can be repaired the way boats can. When winter settles into it, work is helder, and the nights grow long but not cruel. Kettle lights a lamp and reads the box back to itself, so the village remembers how often it has chosen to keep doors open. Noah takes a bench and makes a school out of air. She has the children hold a length of nettle twine between thumb and forefinger and say a word across it. Hello, bread, goat, sorry. Then feel the way the twine remembers the word shape. Tie it, she says, and shows him a simple hitch that lives just behind the teeth. They practice until apology stops, sounding like a borrowed coat, and starts fitting the tongue. They learn the square, not a promise. Leftover right, then sincerity, the bowline of grief. A loop the rabbit can always find again. The fisherman's bend of praise, 2 turns, because one is boasting. When a child laughs too hard to speak, Noah lets the laughter do its job and ties it to quiet afterward, so neither is left unaccompanied. She builds a wall of chalk marks at kid height. Small pictures for breath a bellows, for pause a chair, for try again a door set ajar. She teaches them to listen to their feet. Words live in your ribs, she explains, tapping her sternum. Let breath show them the stairs. In spring, she takes them to the river and has them practice speaking into water. The ones who whisper learn that water prefers boldness. The shouters learn that water likes accuracy more than volume. Each goes home with a piece of twine around the wrist and a private, not they choose, to remind hands what mouths intend. Ari writes. He resists the glamour of tidy endings and writes how things are mended in the middle. He sets down the saga you've just heard with fewer metaphors than he's tempted to use and more chores. He names every helper. The woman who kept soup near fire through 3 reckonings. The boy who stood in the doorway and blocked a draft with nothing but a posture. The old man who, for once, did not advise. He leaves blanks where boasting would like to stand. He makes rooms in the text for two silences, one for the child and one for the season, to keep breathing without being owned. When a sentence tries to turn into a law, he trims it with the wolf-tooth knife until it becomes a principle a tired person can carry. He copies the names of the carrot Joyner gives to dovetails, and when his hand cramps, he stops rather than let sloppiness make a truth less durable. On the first page, he writes a dedication to the weather, to the wind that learned to escort instead of shove, to Held who holds, to light that clocks him without applause. He does not flatter the gods. He thanks them like a neighbor thanked for a borrowed tool returned clean. The Raven approves more than it admits. It perches on a lintel and listens to drafts read aloud to the square when evenings are long enough for story and short enough for bed. It interrupts only to correct a rhythm. You're rushing the part where nothing happened, which is a point, and to steal the occasional crust when applause sounds like rain. When Ari reaches the last leaf, he leaves a space wider than a thumb for the world's future sentence, then writes a line the bird has been auditioning in its sleep for weeks. A name is not a leash. It is a door you promise to keep open. The Raven nods like a judge whose vanity has at last been fed the right portion. Write that twice. It suggests. Ari doesn't. He knows once is stronger. He reads the proverb aloud and watches as it finds homes. In the bell rope, on Kettle's shelf, stitched small in flax on the hem of Bringe's sail, chalked at child height on Noah's wall. The phrase does not stand in the street and shout. It hangs by doors and waits to be useful. Life proceeds with the modest pageantry of competence. Boats leave and return with ordinary luck. Bread rises and falls, and once in a while surprises everyone. Names are spoken correctly more often than not, and when mistakes happen, the apology knows it's not. Winter, pleased with its room, keeps the cold where it corrects and withdraws when it begins to bruise. Spring arrives without heroics. The square learns to celebrate on the scale of a well-fit hinge, a smooth swing, a satisfied click, a door that does its work and stays friendly. Ari closes the book one day at a table that used to wobble and doesn't now. He sets the wolf-tooth knife beside it, edge inward, and the amber vessel on the sill where light can look at itself without becoming proud. Outside, children practice tying their words. Inside, Bringe's flax threads dry in small, bright lines. Kettle cleans a bowl for the next naming with the respect you give to a tool that will touch a soul. The Raven, full of proverb and crust, sleeps. The village breathes in its own cadence. The door in the hush minds itself. And the saga, not finished, merely properly paused, waits on the shelf of the next hand to turn the page without hurry.